We're going to deal with the clouds. The rain has eased back as we thought. Late morning, early afternoon, we get a little bit of a break, and that is certainly the case. But afternoon showers will return. A cool Halloween, showers, and even a few snowflakes around. And yes, the first snow. We could get some snow showers tomorrow at
Good morning. I'm State Senator Jeremy Cooney, proudly representing the 56th District of New York, which is the Greater Rochester region, and here in my capacity as chair of the Cannabis Subcommittee for the State Senate. I'm so pleased to be joined and honored to co-chair today's public hearing with Senator Liz Krueger, Senator Michelle Henchy, Senator James Skoufis, who are leading with their respective standing committees with Agriculture, Finance, Investigations, and Government Operations. I want to thank the Majority Leader and her team for their support and preparation for today's long-awaited hearing. And I'm so pleased to be here also in my capacity as the co-chair of the Cannabis Subcommittee and the Marijuana Task Force of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. The goal of the opportunity for stakeholders across the adult use retail cannabis space to raise concerns and to offer constructive feedback regarding the current cannabis landscape in order to foster a more robust and equitable recreational adult use cannabis marketplace in New York. We'll hear testimony from a range of stakeholders, from state and local agencies, dispensaries and card licensees, grow processors, organized labor, and other cannabis businesses. And we'll also use today's testimony as a guide as we develop policy and consider budget resources next year during the 2024 legislative session. I'd like to invite each of the standing committee co-chairs with the opportunity to say a few words, noting that we'll save the majority of our time for questions during the hearing. And with that, I'll turn it to my colleague of the chair of the Finance Committee, Senator Liz Krueger.
Thank you very much. I appreciate participating in this hearing. What Jeremy didn't say is I'm also the original sponsor of the MRTA bill, which probably is more relevant for today than the fact that I'm the finance chair. I'm going to save most of my statements for the questions for all of you. Clearly, when we passed this law, which took 7 years to pass, by the way, so we thought we didn't necessarily think through everything. And what I like is if you think you didn't quite get it right, you have second and third and fourth opportunities to do so. That's why we have jobs here. So I'm very interested in hearing from all of you what you think is working, what you don't think is working, and why. Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for participating today. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for your continued leadership with cannabis, obviously not only as the bill sponsor for the MRTA, but has been leading and having multiple conversations with probably many folks in this room over the past couple of years. I'd now like to invite Chair Hinchey from the Agriculture Committee.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you to all of the testifiers. This is an incredibly important hearing. I want to thank Chair Coon for hosting this today. Our focus, as everybody knows, has been on and continues to be on support for our farmers, the farmers who stepped out to grow the crop, to make sure that we had a New York grown crop for our growing and soon to be created market. And many of them, almost all of them, have been fairly left out in the cold with a lot of crop that's left on the table. And so our focus here today is to understand what we can do for our farmers, but to hear and understand the holistic industry, where it stands today and where we hope to be going in the future. So thank you to the chairs for hosting this today, and look forward to the hearing.
Thank you, Chair Hinchey, and thank you for your leadership. She's been part of many conversations around growers and cultivators over the past several months. Also would like to invite Chair Skoufis, Chair of the Investigations and Government Operations Committee.
Thanks very much, Senator Cooney. I want to thank all three of my fellow co-chairs for their leadership in this issue area. I'm delighted to join and look forward to a robust hearing. I'm certainly going to keep this brief and save my remarks and questions for the many panels. I'll just note that we're 943 days since March 31st of 2021, when the MRTA legislation was signed into law by the then governor. And in the Hudson Valley that I represent alongside a number of other colleagues, there is not one single dispensary open 943 days later. And so most, if not almost all, the stakeholders that I've interacted with, they have viewed the rollout over the 943 days as challenging, to put it kindly, if not unsuccessful or a failure. And so I look forward to understanding why that is and what we can all do to work together to try and improve upon that perception, if not reality. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Senator Skoufis. I'd like to now recognize those who are here from the committees and the Cannabis Subcommittee in no particular order, just by my own line of sight. We have Senator Griffo, we have Senator Rivera, we have Senator Rollison, we have Senator Fernandez, we have Senator Helming, we have Senator Hoylman. I'm going on the other side of Michelle. We've got Senator Ryan, we've got Senator May, Senator Mannion, Senator Matera. Wow, it's been a little bit of a while, but I remembered everyone. But delighted everyone could travel to Albany to be part of this important conversation. Before we get started, just a couple of procedural logistics to get on the record. If anyone is here who is going to testify during one of the upcoming panels, they have not checked in, please do so at the back of the room, the check-in table, so that we can make note that you are here and we can prepare for your testimony. As you know, we have a lot of speakers who have traveled great distance here, so we want to be mindful of time. Otherwise, we will be here like a budget hearing, and we have lots of good leadership to happen on that next year. So we will take a very, very short lunch break after our government witnesses, and our goal is to finish in the late afternoon, and Senator Kruger reminded me that Bob Dylan is performing tonight, so we have something to work our goal towards. We obviously want this hearing to be engaging, but we want to ask those who are observing today's proceeding to please remain as quiet as possible and maintain a respectful tone for those who have prepared testimony today. Panelists, please limit your testimony to no longer than 3 minutes. Members have copies of your written testimony, or in OCM's case, we've emailed it out, so don't feel like you need to review all of what you've written down and submitted. We do have a time clock available for you to reference. Committee chairs, the standing committee chairs, will each have 5 minutes to ask questions during each panel, and other members of our various committees and subcommittee will have 3 minutes. Certainly I will be respectful, but please remember that we have many folks who are here to testify, and we want to make sure things keep moving forward. So, with that being said, our first panel is the Office of Cannabis Management, starting with Chris Alexander. Chris, I'll let you introduce your team, but before we do that, I'll turn it over to Chair Skoufis.
Thanks very much. For the government panels, we'll be swearing you all in for your testimony, which is our prerogative under Section 62A of the legislative law. So if each of you could raise your right hand, if you don't mind. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before these committees of the New York State Senate will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. I want to start off by thanking Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Finance Committee Chair Senators Kruger, Ag Committee Chair Michelle Hinchy, Investigations and GovOps Chair James Skoufis, and Cannabis Subcommittee Chair Jeremy Cooney for inviting OCM here to provide testimony at this inaugural hearing on New York's cannabis. I want to also thank Governor Hochul, who has demonstrated her commitment to this mission from the moment she appointed me to this role. Since my appointment to the role of the Executive Director of the Office of Cannabis Management in September of 2021, the office has worked diligently to make good on the commitments that this body made to New Yorkers with the passage of the MRTA in March of that year. Those commitments included a much-needed expansion of the already operational but severely underutilized medical cannabis, the formalization of the cannabinoid hemp program that largely existed as a pilot at the time, and the development of the most equitable and diverse adult-use cannabis marketplace in the country. I've also been tasked with building out the office by recruiting, hiring, and training staff with key competencies, developing internal policies and procedures, drafting regulations for the programs we oversee, and educating interested industry participants and everyday New Yorkers who are undoubtedly impacted by this significant policy shift. This has been no small feat, and of course, we have had our challenges along the way. While the MRTA passed in March and I was appointed in September, the office did not have staff until December of 2021. The initial finding temporary office space, designing the agency organizational chart and team structures, and recruiting staff to serve in key leadership positions. The office began operations in earnest in January 2022, just 22 months after the initial staff officially transitioned to the office from the Department of Health. We are now an agency of approximately 160 full-time staff with an expected target of 245 by March of 2024. We have secured office spaces in Albany, Buffalo, and Lower Manhattan, and have made significant headway on many of the mandates that this body has assigned to us. Despite persistent and ongoing challenges with staffing, the office got to work immediately expanding the medical cannabis and cannabinoid hemp programs and laying the foundations for the adult use program. We put forward regulations authorizing New York's cannabis patients to cultivate cannabis at home and operationalize many of the programmatic changes required to be implemented by the MRTA, including an expansion of the universe of practitioners able to certify patients and of conditions that can be treated with medical cannabis. We also made necessary changes to the program that would bring the program in closer alignment with the adult use program that would follow, including modifying testing requirements and introducing packaging recycling programs. We also advanced cannabinoid hemp program regulations and established consumer protections and quality control standards for manufacturing, packaging, and labeling of cannabinoid hemp products, and began issuing cannabinoid hemp retail licenses to subject those selling CBD products in the state to necessary health and safety standards. The development of the adult use program also began early last year with the dedication of operations, policy, and council staff to what would become a massive group research project. The team engaged with other legal cannabis state regulators and operators, subject matter experts, and others to develop the adult use regulations. Those regulations govern licensing, general business operations, cultivation and processing standards, cannabis product testing, advertising and labeling, dispensary siting, and sustainability practices. They create a framework for an equitable and sustainable cannabis industry that is grounded in public health best practices and guards against market concentration and monopolization. In February of 2022, before the adult use regulations were finalized, legislation was passed and signed creating the conditional cultivator and conditional processor programs and jumpstarting what would become known as the Seeding Opportunity Initiative. The initiative was a licensing and market building strategy that represented New York's response to the universal experience of other states who decided to build their markets with existing well-capitalized operators, leaving little opportunity for others. Through the initiative, New York would make different choices about the market's design as an early demonstration of the commitment to equity that is woven throughout the enabling statute. The Seeding Opportunity Initiative positioned New York small farmers at the start of New York's cannabis supply chain, and regulations introduced in March of 22 placed entrepreneurs who had been directly impacted by prohibition who would hold New York's first adult use retail licenses at the end. The Conditional Adult Use Retail Dispensary, or CARD program, has now been stalled twice by litigation. Still, the program stands as the first time that any state cannabis program has led with directing opportunity to those who were most impacted by previous policies via a conviction for a cannabis offense. The stalling of the CARD program has had significant impact on the rest of New York's adult use cannabis supply chain. Small farmers who were already distressed were left with no outlets for their product and have experienced significant financial hardship and uncertainty as a result. New York small farmers cultivated approximately 225,000 pounds of cannabis in the first grow season under the sun. They've seen approximately half of that cannabis make it to consumers through the supply chain, either as a flower product or as a value-added product such as an edible or a concentrate. The lack of available shelf space is one of the most pressing issues facing the office and the state's cannabis market. The office introduced the Cannabis Growers Showcase as a mechanism to encourage retail activity and raise the profile of cannabis brands that were unable to get placed on limited store shelves. This program, approved by the board in July, allowed for off-site sales and served the dual purpose of introducing consumers to the farmers who are producing their cannabis. To date, we have held 584 showcase days and have sold $1.9 million worth of cannabis products at the showcases. The Cannabis Growers Showcase is just one of the many examples of the ingenuity of the team here at OCM. As you all know, the CARD program was launched with the intention of providing justice-involved entrepreneurs with access to built-out retail facilities in addition to their licenses. As we drew closer to the issuing of the first CARD licenses, it became clearer that the securing of private investment due to changes in capital markets would require us to give the program a pathway forward that did not rely on the heavy lift that we, along with our colleagues at DASNY, were undertaking. It was at that time that we decided to allow licensees to secure their own locations or to launch their businesses as delivery-only operations while they work to secure permanent retail locations. This pivot may have created some consternation amongst our licensee pool, but it also made it possible to expand the pool, as the pledged resources could go further if those who had some access to capital were utilizing it to get themselves operational. Still, those licensees faced a similar reality that every small business owner faces, that it takes time to get a business off the ground. By our count, the average time from license issuance to the commencement of operation has been about 7 months for those licensees who are able to move unencumbered by litigation. That time frame is not unique to New York operators and tracks with experiences by cannabis operators in other states with legal markets. Today, we have 27 operational retail businesses across the state. Those businesses are carrying an average of 300 unique cannabis products across a variety of product types, including flower products, beverages, edibles, and tinctures. New York's consumers have strongly supported the legal cannabis businesses in their communities. In fact, it is likely that by the end of the year, New York will boast heavy representation among the top performing dispensaries. This is a byproduct of strong consumer demand, but is also indicative of the willingness of New Yorkers to support the broader mission that New York Cannabis has committed itself to. While we see clearly what New York Cannabis will be, we still have a long way to go before we can claim that the supply chain is functioning as intended. Our small farmers, as you know and as I've already stated, are struggling. We need more retail shelves for their product, and we are working to make that a reality. But we're also committed to learning from this moment and providing more stability to an already volatile industry. That is why we intend to work to expand our successful grower showcases and support farmers hardest hit by the slow rollout of retail stores. Currently, to either micro or mixed light licenses, allowing Should they choose, we'll be launching the Distressed Farmer Transition Program in the coming weeks to support our small farmers as they expand their businesses. Equity is the foundation of this market, and support programs like the Distressed Farmer Transition Program are crucial to ensuring the success of those diverse operators we hope will succeed here. In May, the office released a social and economic equity plan, which presents the strategy for advancing the office's mission to build a fair, inclusive, and equitable foundation for the New York market equity team, but it was developed in partnership with the same equity groups it hopes to support. The office spent a year hosting equity community roundtables to assess support needs, gather input for program development, and build community with New Yorkers who have sometimes been ignored when economic opportunities such as this are made available. The office has completed 2 small business development programs for equity entrepreneurs to date. The first was a 10-week cannabis compliance training and mentorship program, which had 241 participants. The program was designed to support individuals interested in cannabis cultivation and processing. Many of these program participants knew all there was to know about cannabis cultivation and processing, but the CCTM program provided them with a firm understanding of OCM rules and regulations for both activities. The CCTM program had a graduation rate of 97%. The second small business development program was the Our Academy Card Accelerator program, designed to aid our retail entrepreneurs in running their businesses. This program had 212 participants who participated in 44 workshops and received over 70 hours of instruction from cannabis retail experts. The office will continue to expand and update these business development opportunities and will in the coming months announce additional steps taken to launch the incubation services that we are required to provide by the MRTA. Since legalization, New Yorkers have had to deal with the proliferation of illegal cannabis businesses. Our story is not unique, but our problem is expansive. These businesses are not selling product grown by our small farmers, they're not run by equity entrepreneurs, and they're not contributing to the betterment of the communities in which they operate. The enforcement team has prioritized working to shut down these illegal businesses in every region of the state. Over the last several months, we have conducted almost 300 regulatory inspections and seized close to 10,000 pounds of illicit cannabis with an approximate value of $50 million. But those numbers are only a small segment of the enforcement activity that our team has engaged in, because they do not count the work that has been done educating and empowering local governments and law enforcement entities to act as a force multiplier in this effort. In recent weeks, we have leaned into the education effort and have worked to expand the coalition of entities working to drive these operators out of business, including broader collaboration with the Department of Labor and the real estate community. We are thankful for the additional powers that the legislature and the governor provided OCM to expand our ability to enforce the cannabis law. We have developed regulations to govern our administrative hearings, through which fines are sought and levied against unlicensed cannabis businesses, and continue to fine-tune the administrative hearing process over the last few months to reduce inefficiencies and increase efficacy, which has proven to be challenging. The enforcement effort does not solely consist of product seizures. It must also include expansive education of cannabis consumers and, of course, the opening of more legal alternatives. In December of 2022, we deployed the dispensary verification tool to assist consumers in identifying legal cannabis businesses and safer cannabis products. Communities they serve, and their commitments to providing a quality product to New York's cannabis consumers. We've also developed numerous educational materials for consumers, parents, and educators, striving always to provide fact-based resources for New Yorkers. The office has also conducted significant data monitoring and epidemiological surveillance to measure and monitor the impact of cannabis legalization on the state. In addition, the office has stood up one of the most comprehensive cannabis laboratory testing programs in the country, pulling best practices from other states and similar industries to ensure the cannabis sold in the regulated market is tested and does not contain any harmful contaminants. We're also prioritizing the further development of cannabis research by launching the Cannabis Research License, allowing academics, universities, and other researchers to access and research cannabis in ways that are prohibited or unnecessarily bureaucratic at the federal level. It is our hope and vision that this will open the doors for New York to be a leader in cannabis research and innovation across the country. There's so much more work being done here that I didn't highlight, and still, so much more work to do. We are 2 years into this experiment, and I want you all to know that it is working. We have launched the most diverse and equitable market in the nation. At the start of the year, there were approximately 20 Black-owned dispensaries across the country. New York just opened 8 more. While we have not operationalized all licenses that we have issued over 700 licenses to largely equity entrepreneurs. These are small farmers, small family businesses that are independently owned and operated and in a great position to succeed. And even with a minimal footprint, the market has already generated over 100 million in retail sales, and that's a number that will continue to grow. We have done the difficult work of community building by hosting education sessions and meaningfully engaging with communities in every corner of the state, organizing future entrepreneurs, local leaders, and individuals interested in joining the cannabis workforce. The 2 public health campaigns that we launched this year are amongst the largest ever in the history of country, and they've collectively made 385 million impressions on New Yorkers. We are the first state to develop a research program, and I have no doubt that the next major breakthroughs in cannabis science will happen right here in New York. Looking ahead, we're prepared to issue a significant number of licenses in the coming months, expanding the opportunity to all New Yorkers to participate in this growing market. In closing, when I last sat in front of this body, I was asked repeatedly if I knew how much I was getting paid. My response was that I didn't, and more transparently, that I didn't care. Leading this office and seeing the impact that we have been able to make in this short time has been incredible. As I've now stated multiple times, there is so much more to do, and this transition has been a painful one for so many. But I and my team will continue to do the hard things, and will continue fighting to ensure that New York's cannabis market becomes what we all know that it can be. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Alexander, and gave you a little bit of leeway there with time, but it was important that you share the many things that you and your team have been working on over the past several months, and we appreciate that work. We appreciated also the data points that your team shared with us over the weekend. We did share that with all of the committee members here, so we can reference that in light with your testimony. I'll start with my questions. Each chair, as a reminder, will have 5 minutes to ask questions. Members will have 3 minutes, and we'll go from there. And then, Mr. Alexander, you can designate members of your team to respond if appropriate. Kind of picking up on something that you said, you talked about the Why Buy Legal campaign, and I think that's a terrific campaign. One of the things that we've heard from OCM and certainly heard from all of us here is the importance that the cannabis products that are being sold in legal retail dispensaries are safer. They've gone through some laboratory testing process. They've been approved for sale. In your written materials, you talked about the BioTrax system, and we're going to be talking with an individual representing BioTrax later on today in the hearing. When will that system be implemented and set up to go? I know the RFP was in 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct. As I begin, Senators, I just want to introduce some members of my team that are here. There are plenty of us here in the audience, but first, the state's Chief Equity Officer, Damian Fagan, my first Deputy Director, Pat McCage, and the Director of Enforcement, Dan Hackney. We're going to be here to answer your questions. My General Counsel is also present to jump in should there be any additional questions. Linda Baldwin. So the BioTrack program, scheduled implementation, I believe, is for November 1st. We have been working to ensure that the program is updated and able to deal with the fact that one of our key requirements during the RFP was that their system be able to integrate with anybody else's tracking, seed-to-sale tracking system. And so we've been working with them diligently. We have weekly calls just to get this program running. By November 1st, I believe, is the operational date when we'll start utilizing that system fully. In the meantime, every operator has been engaged in inventory tracking that is reviewed and confirmed by the office.
And will that same system be used to help, and we'll talk with Tax and Finance later on today, but used to help decipher where the sale took place? So for example, when we're doing the reinvestment, right? So the 3% to the municipality for which the dispensary was located and the 1% for the county, that will be used to determine, okay, this was a dispensary in this town versus this city within this county. And will that all be tracked through?
It definitely
BioTrack?
helps to track it. I mean, we also have direct reporting from dispensaries themselves, so we do know who's making which sales of which products. So it'll help make that process more efficient.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to enforcement, we're going to have a lot of talks about enforcement, and Senator Krueger did some great work on enforcement in the budget this past session. My question is obviously stemming off of the most recent media reports about the hearings themselves. And we understand that this is a process for the enforcement. It's not just one decision maker. But when it comes to the administrative side and holding the hearings, is this something, I know that the article reported that OCM has made a decision not to continue those hearings or suspending them for a temporarily basis. Can you kind of talk about what's next step? How are you planning to restart those? What the timeline is for doing so?
Absolutely, and so the issuing of penalties is incredibly necessary and important to being able to close down these shops. We got the new powers earlier this year. We have been able to issue and update our enforcement regulations. For those who watched our meetings, we've now done, I believe, 3 updates to those regulations to ensure that those hearings, the administrative side of hearings, as well as our general enforcement actions, are efficient. The pause really is a recognition that we are still doing some fine-tuning of that process, working to make sure that we get the largest fines possible for the illicit operators. But the investigation side of things that Dan's team right here, they never slow down. And so we've got, while we're changing and updating this process, in this most recent board meeting, we updated those hearings again, those regulations again. We've got to now catch everything else up to those changes in processes. And so the pause was a recognition that we were definitely in some ways, getting way out ahead in terms of our investigation operations and needed to catch up the administrative process to that.
Understood. Let's talk about staffing. You talked about around 150 or so current staff members. We know you're going through a hiring process to onboard perhaps even as many as 100 more or so over the next year or so. Could you talk to us about resources required for doing so? So in the budget process, we'll look at the governor's executive budget that she proposes, but do you anticipate the need for additional financial resources from the state to kind of get the operation to where you need it to be in terms of reviewing and doing enforcement?
Yeah, no, and the purpose of me reading through the entirety of the testimony is really just to highlight the amount of work that is going on here at the office. We were able to launch a licensing program within 4 months of operations, something that normally takes 2 years, and issue new licenses, something that normally takes 2 years in other states. And so we've taken on quite a bit of work. I am thankful to the legislature and the governor for the additional resources that were given last budget cycle to increase enforcement capacity. However, there is still that need, of course, for more resources, but then simultaneously a need to get folks in position quickly. We have done something I think many agencies may do periodically or over time, but that is create our own title series for licensing, for employment through civil service. One of our initial projects was creating this new title series to bring individuals into state service that previously were not engaged in that. And so it's been a process getting folks hired and staffed up. We obviously need more, but I think really the process is both and more resources and a more efficient process of getting folks into position. And that's, we've had a great relationship more recently with civil service, and they've been able to work through certain issues with us as we have them, but there are some institutional challenges that we've got to work through.
Okay, thank you. My time has elapsed. Open it up to questions. Senator Krueger.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and all of your team. I certainly recognize there have been all kinds of problems that we didn't anticipate when we rolled out this bill, and then many things happened. I want to follow up on Chair Cooney's question about following up on the illegal stores. I represent, obviously, a piece of New York City, and I know in New York City, it seems that the biggest concern is so many illegal stores, and that why would anybody go to a legal store, even though there's a good ad campaign of why you should, if it's available on sometimes more than 2 per block in certain parts of my district, and there's no taxes and there's no sort of any kind of rules, and young people are going in, and we tried to be very clear this was a product that couldn't be sold to people under 21. So I understand that you're staffing up and there's not enough of you to do the thousands of illegal stores, but help me understand again, and we've talked about this, I just want to ask you, in public, if you close an illegal store and you take the product, but the fines aren't big enough to actually discourage people from just opening up again, and we did change the law to make the fines much bigger, then I don't believe it works at all. That you'll spend time and resources closing stores, and they'll say, oh, okay, they'll take the product, and 2 days later I'll reopen, and maybe I'll get tickets, but I'm never gonna get to a hearing, and they're never really going to fine me the up to $20,000 a day, so I'll just keep going. What do we need to do? Because clearly whatever we did isn't really working. So what do you recommend? And maybe it does require legislative action as opposed to just regulatory action. What do we need to do?
And thank you, Senator. And again, I acknowledge fully the scope of this problem. I know many of you have these shops in your districts. You've called on our office for action, and we've tried to be there. I think one of the big changes that came in the most recent update to our enforcement powers was that shifting of a upfront bulk fine to that per day fine, which could, if operationalized, be significant. The most recent regulatory change that we made to our enforcement regulations was after recognition that because we were coming back for a secondary inspection before the hearing, that our administrative law judges were inferring or weren't able to make the inference of continued illicit activity throughout the entirety of that time, right? So we've got initial inspection, we come back a couple weeks later for a follow-up inspection before an administrative hearing. But because, of how the statute was written, there was definitely some space to infer not continued activity that entirety of that time. We've made changes to require a certificate of compliance to be sent by the illegal operator so that we can lock them into that $20,000 a day. But that's just a change to this approach that can get us some higher fines in certain instances, but that requires us to make that operational adjustment. What I'd also say, though, even at the $20,000 a day limit for some of these folks who are owning multiple operations across the city or across the state, it is still, a cost of doing business at times. And so I don't know what the exact number may be to fully deter, but to be able to take some more significant action at the onset when we issue that notice of closure, a violation of the cannabis law, might be a helpful direction. But I do want to turn to Dan Hackney, our Director of Enforcement, for his thoughts on this as well.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about enforcement. I know there will certainly be a lot more questions about that side of things. And thanks, Chris. So we were empowered with a certain authority with the latest legislation that sets up a process for our enforcement mechanism. That starts with us going in and conducting a regulatory inspection at the location. When we observe violations of the cannabis law and we observe illicit products in the store, we subsequently make a seizure. We issue a notice of violation and cease order at the time of our inspection. And we're also doing this in conjunction with the Department of Taxation and Finance Criminal Investigation Division. And before I get into more of the process, I do want to say that cohesive enforcement mechanism between OCM and DTF has been instrumental in the success of what we've been able to do out in the field so far. I think it's an outstanding collaboration between agencies that is not something that you see throughout the state very often. But again, when we go do those inspections, we're working in conjunction with DTF. So we make that seizure. The OCM investigators are focused on the violations of cannabis law. The tax investigators are focused on the tax violations and the tax penalties. All the product is seized, brought back to our evidence warehouse, and we follow through. We make the referrals to our hearing process. That is step one. Step two, as Chris mentioned, is doing a re-inspection to see which locations are actually heeding our cease order or which ones continue to operate in defiance of that cease order. Once that has been done, we go through the hearing, and it's up to the administrative law judge to issue any penalties. After that, and sometimes concurrently, when we have locations that are operating that are particularly egregious, there are certain injunctive relief avenues we can go through to get temporary restraining orders, temporary closing orders, and ultimately to padlock the store. But that is something that does require working with the Attorney General's office. So it is a large process. From my standpoint with enforcement, operationally, I'm incredibly proud of the work that our team has done. As Chris mentioned, the number of inspections we've been able to do, the amount of product we've been able to seize has been significant for the staff that we have. But working with that process, it is a long-term process. I would love nothing more than to be able to go through and when we finish our inspection, have that store closed. But currently, that's not the process that we have, and we're doing what we can. So I totally understand from the public perception point of things. It's not a quick fix, but I know that as long as we continue to work with the process that we have, and hopefully we can expand that. We've seen what the initial legislation has given us. Now that we've been doing this for a number of months, I think there's quite a few points that we can fine-tune things to get really to the heart of the matter to get the results that everyone in the state wants.
Just a quick follow-up. So I know that my district, and I suspect everybody's district, wants to help you, okay? Because they want the stores closed. So in New York City, we are used to people doing photos on their phones that timestamp and sending them to various government entities to say, see, they're parked illegally again for the 47th time. Or see, they're doing X and there are potholes that needs to be repaired. And those are actually taken as reports. Is it possible that in order to help you, because they're saying the hearing officers, you need to prove every day that they're open, could like a photo, if I went and took a photo of all the illegal stores every day in my district, could I just submit them to you, date stamped, and you go, oh, here, hearing officer, we have the photos from Senator Krueger showing these stores are still open. Could something like that work?
Well, we are working to figure out kind of what, and this is really a great point of collaboration that we've had with the New York City Sheriff's Office and others to get some regular feedback on when illicit activity has continued. I'd have to check with the team on the admissibility of the photos themselves to stand as evidence, but I think the statute doesn't require them to do everyday inspections. It's just that because sometimes there is a couple of weeks in between that first and that second follow-up, it was just space for the judges they felt challenged to infer that activity had concluded, had been ongoing for the entirety of that time. So that's really the gap that we were trying to work on. I do think that the most recent update to the regulations do that, but now it's just rolling that out. What I do want to just point to, we do have a task force with the New York City, with the city. We work with the Sheriff's Office, NYPD participates as well, and we essentially do data sharing, updates, we direct activity. The district attorney helps as well, so at their pursuit, we're not conflicting as we do our enforcement activity. And something I want to highlight again, this is a everything you got type issue, right? And so we've been leaning on not just other regulatory bodies like the Department of Labor, but anybody that can assist in this effort, and we're looking to continue to expand that.
Thank you, Chris. Chair now recognizes Senator Hinchey.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and for your testimony. Assemblymember Donna Lopardo and I have been effectively sounding the alarm since the middle of the legislative session earlier this year on the crisis that's happening right now for our cannabis farmers, to effectively very little to almost zero response. We have a bill, the Cannabis Crop Rescue Act, that could be one solution, and to date it has been the only solution on the table. We're not saying it is the solution, but is the only one that's been presented. We've been begging for support to effectively very little response. To understand the scope, a year ago, OCM estimated there was 300,000 pounds of cannabis stockpiled and awaiting retail locations to open. Based on an average estimated wholesale value of about $2,500 per pound, according to Cannabis Benchmarks, which is a research firm that tracks wholesale marijuana prices nationwide, that stockpile would have been worth as much as $750 million. But as we know, unprocessed cannabis has a shelf life and deteriorates over time, affecting its value. We've heard in your testimony today the stats on illicit and illegal cannabis stores, but can you talk about what is out there currently? How much on the legal side? How much cannabis does OCM estimate is left from that stockpile? And how much money has been lost to farmers because of the depreciation of cannabis?
Yeah, and Senator, I want to thank you, of course, for your advocacy and for your sponsorship of that conditional cultivator bill. That was really something, again, that's never been done in the country, to lean on not existing operators to jumpstart the market. One thing that I continue to say is how proud we are of the farmers in terms of what they've contributed, because the products that we're able to have here in the state do not are high quality and, honestly are able to compete with any state, even if grown under the sun versus grown inside. The one thing that, what we have right now, I think we have just around 120 to 130,000 pounds of biomass outstanding that needs to be either processed or sold. We, as I said earlier, launched the Cannabis Growers Showcase program as an effort to get some relief to farmers who did not have access to retail shelves. It's not enough. It's not a replacement for legal dispensaries. And, frankly, we now, the solution is, of course, more stores, as we know. But in the interim, we're trying to figure out what is going to be the best way to either incentivize the businesses so that they survive, and trying to figure out ways to deal with essentially that excess biomass.
Thank you. Right, more stores in the future doesn't necessarily help the 2022 crop that we're dealing with now, that every single day loses value. And the showcases have been great, but they are a drop in the bucket for what we need and for the farmers, to help the farmers that exist today. You mentioned a distressed farmers transition program. Does that include financial support?
The distressed farm, I'm going to have Damon speak to that, but the program itself does not include financial support. It does speak to them being made aware of and trained on how to transition from the outdoor grows that they have to either micro or mixed lights.
For the sake of time, the answer, there's no financial support. And I also want to get on the record, just in that program, I want to get on the record, outdoor grow is actually a very good thing. It is possible in New York, it is happening, and it's actually concerning to me to hear the focus from OCM being shifting into greenhouses as opposed to incentivizing outdoor grow, especially as we try to hit our climate goals. Greenhouses are incredibly energy intensive, and outdoor grow is real. I'm happy to take you to some outdoor grow farms in my district. It's great, and sun-grown products are actually something that people want, and so for another time, for the sake of time, I want to make sure
If I
we're
could just respond to that,
incentivizing
because that's not an accurate statement in terms of our commitment to outdoor grow. We're the first state to have an entire cannabis crop of outdoor cannabis, ever. And so the commitment is absolutely there, but some of the farmers have, expressed interest in transitioning to other license types, including micro and, greenhouse, so they can have more turns of that crop. But I just want to turn to Damon just to explain the program, and we can talk about future financial support.
I want to ask, do you think that a recovery fund is important to help the farmers that have been hurt to date, right? Let's remember, these are hemp farmers. We did the conditional cultivator license bill to help hemp farmers that we actually hurt when we legalized hemp in the first place. We've now hit them twice. So do you think a recovery fund for the farmers that are struggling from this initial rollout is important?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the statute as drafted allows us to support our equity licensees financially. As you know, the revenue is starting to come in now, and so we'll have a lot more space to do and create such programs.
So you think that there's funding that you're receiving at OCM that will be enough to cover a recovery fund for all of the farmers and the excess cannabis that we have not been able to sell?
I can't make the definitive statement because I don't know exactly, because just to be clear, the product pricing per pound, that number is significant and differs from what we can, what we've seen here
Right.
for outdoor flower products.
Do you know the cost, right? You said that there's about 130,000 pounds about still out there. That's decreased from about 300,000, so that's over half that we've lost. And that's money that the farmers won't get back to date. Do you think, what's the amount of money that farmers are owed?
I just want to clarify, that's not a representation of what's been lost, it's a representation of what's been sold. So we've sold half of the flower that we produced in the state. We didn't lose half. That number that I'm giving in terms of
sold or processed.
Yeah, sold or processed. That number of that 130 is what is outstanding that needs to be either sold or processed.
And how much do you think that costs?
Oh, it's going on it's on the market $300 a pound. I mean, it's outdoor biomass, so it's not indoor flower, which is $2,500 a pound generally.
I'm out of time.
Mr. Fig, if you have additional thoughts, if you could share that offline.
Yeah,
with
the
Senator
distress
Kruger.
farmer
No,
transition.
Mr. Fig, we've got to move on to Senator Skoufis. But
Okay,
if you could
got
share
it.
that offline with Senator Kruger,
Okay,
Senator
all good.
Hinchey,
All of
that'd be
us.
great.
In fact, any questions we've asked that you don't have time to respond to, or you say we need more information to get to you, I would urge you to, every testifier today, write it up to us, forward us, Senator Cuny.
And
He'll
we'll put it
make
out.
sure all members of the panel get it.
That's right. Thank you, Senator Skoufis.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to each of you. Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for your leadership. You had mentioned during your opening remarks that you believe the system is working. And what I'm about to say is certainly not a reflection of the 100+ people that are within OCM. Even the many, many stakeholders that I've spoken with who have great frustration acknowledge that you all are understaffed and overworked. And so the frustration, the at times anger from stakeholders, I don't think is any reflection of their attitude towards the effort and the hard work. It's really a reflection of their frustration of just sort of where we are here in New York State. And where we are in the Hudson Valley, as I mentioned before, if you're a consumer, you are in all likelihood traveling still to New Jersey or Connecticut or Massachusetts instead of making purchases here in New York State nearly 1,000 days after this law was enacted. And so to that end, given that reality, at least that I and most people acknowledge, there were shortcomings or at least unintended consequences in the law and subsequently in the regs. If you agree, have you proposed any program bills to try and make any corrections to the statute? If not, have you had any conversations with the legislature to make amendments?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I guess, the statement about it's working. I'm speaking clearly about the goal of creating a diverse and equitable market that guards against that monopolization that we've seen in other states. Obviously, the retail footprint is not sufficient at this moment, and I don't make any. I don't run from that fact. We've got to open more stores. We've issued 463 retail licenses. We expected to have more folks open, but obviously, as folks are aware of the litigation, current litigation, past litigation, have created some challenges there. But I'm speaking really about the rest of it, about having the right folks in the.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
But on the question.
I mean, obviously we worked with you all on the enforcement legislation, which I think was incredibly important. At the start of this, OCM did not have the enforcement powers that we have now. I think that was an incredibly necessary change. And as far as other program bills, I think the focus has been really bolstering that part of things. I do think we should have a conversation about what else is needed. We've also made some changes to the criminal procedure law to ensuring records are being properly expunged as required by law. But other than that, I think really it's just about driving the program as it is now, getting through the litigation so that we have, of the 400 other retail licensees that are ready to open, that we give them a chance to get open. Okay. And of course, we're issuing more licenses as we speak, with the anticipation of issuing almost 1,500 licenses, which will also help with that retail footprint.
There are, and we've touched on this, almost 300 enforcement actions since June that you've all taken. How many of them have to date resulted in penalties, gone through the hearing process before it was unpaused, or before it was paused rather, and have resulted in penalties?
Give me 1 second, I do have that count. Yeah, so from our administrative hearing process, we have just over 16, I believe, through our administrative hearing process. It does not count closures through nuisance law approaches through 16A and other enforcement mechanisms that we have, or the coordination that we've been doing, getting landlords to kick retailers out, et cetera. But our hearing process, I believe, is 16. Yeah,
as a layperson here, and certainly as a lawmaker, that seems like a startlingly low number, given the fact that we all recognize there are thousands of these illegal shops around the state, and the enforcement powers have been in place since June. When are you going to unpause the hearing process?
Well, we just updated, as I said earlier, the hearing of the enforcement regulations to ensure that we're getting the maximum penalties. And so, as we continue to, fine tune that, we should be able to pause it, shortly. I don't know the exact date.
Okay, and when you talk about the maximum penalty, so the statute, I believe, speaks to $20,000 per day that these shops are illegally open. Is that what you all are pursuing? Is that maximum penalty?
That's what we're pursuing.
Okay.
And I think to my comments earlier, I still don't think that's enough.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hoylman?
I think this is working, yes. Good to see you. Nice to see your team, Chris. Just wanted to read a couple of examples of illegal shops in my district, which spans from Christopher Street on the west side of Manhattan up to West 103rd. A worker at Smoke City on 710 9th Avenue was shot in the leg during an attempted robbery in January. There was a shooting in front of a store called Forbidden Cannabis in Hell's Kitchen. An unlicensed shop at 423 9th Avenue was recently held up at gunpoint. There was a fire at an unlicensed smoke shop at 346 West 52nd, Hell's Kitchen Clouds, it's called. By the way, these shops should be shut down just for their bad puns. There are shops, 4 of them, located within a block of a public elementary school, PS 11, High Society, 234 8th Avenue, The Spot, 420, 222 8th Avenue, Ricky's Convenience, 224 8th Avenue, Society Zaza, 239 8th Avenue. There's an unlicensed store at 606 10th Avenue called New World Convenience, with high schoolers from Beacon High School observed to have regularly been entering and leaving. And Empire Cannabis Club at 147 8th Avenue, also near a school, has been observed selling to minors. And at 301 West 55th Street, we've seen cannabis sold. It's an unlicensed shop to high schoolers coming in and out of the shop. Thank you for inspecting that location and seizing cannabis on the site, but it's reopened. It's opened and selling illegal product again. What are we going to do about it? I mean, this is, as much as an inconvenience and as much as this undermines the legal market, this is a public health issue, particularly for young people. Does it not deserve a more expedited process for addressing the illegal shops?
I absolutely agree, Senator. I absolutely agree, Senator. This absolutely is a significant threat to public health, and for the sales to minors, I mean, you know, that remains a felony offense. That is something that remains on the books. I know, you know, law enforcement, particularly in the city, have done underage buys at many of these shops. We want them as close as bad as you do. I'd love for a more efficient process. We've been trying to go and, yep.
Could you tell me what you've observed in your raids of the illegal shops? What is the product? What's being sold? I know it's not from New York. Are the levels of dangerous for consumers, particularly children?
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely. And just to, before I answer that question, just to speak what you mentioned about the shootings and things you've seen, I think that speaks to how much work we have to put in before we go into a location and conduct an inspection. We take the safety and security of our investigators and tax investigators very high. That's our paramount focus when we go in. So it's not just something where our investigators are driving by, we see a shop and we run in and conduct the inspection. There's a lot of groundwork that goes into each one of those inspections before we walk in the door, so we have a better understanding of what we're going to be faced when we get into the location to conduct the inspection, specifically for the reasons that you mentioned. When we go into these locations, I'm happy to say we do not see product that originates in New York State. It's all product, from my perspective, and I've gotten the readout on every inspection. I've been on most of the inspections throughout the state. We're seeing product from out of state. It's not New York licensed locations that are supplying these stores. When we look at the amount of THC and the THC concentration, it is at dangerous levels. You can see a candy bar that would have 1,000 milligrams of THC, which obviously most people, you see a candy bar, you think you're going to eat the whole thing. If you were to eat all of that with the level of THC, that would be a problem. So we see that when we get into locations that are unlicensed and illegal and they're processing their own products in the basement. Those are not products that I would want anyone to consume. I've been in more basements in New York City than a lot of people, and we've seen those processes taking place when we walk in, and it's not a sanitary location. And I think if you go into an illegal store, you see the products, they're marketed to children, they've got cartoons on them, they mimic what we see with Cheetos or Hershey bars or all those things that a kid that may not necessarily read, they can see the logo and they think they know what they're eating. That is not what we see in licensed dispensaries. And it's, I think the dichotomy of going into an illegal store and seeing what's for sale versus going to a licensed dispensary and seeing how clean, how sanitary, and how everything is packaged is glaring. It's complete opposite ends of the spectrum.
Thank you. Time has elapsed. Senator May.
Thank you. Oh, is this on? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. It's good to see you, and thank you all for the work you've been doing. I want to quote from the Syracuse Post-Standard, an article earlier this year, where they said, 2 years after New York legalized recreational marijuana for adult use, Central New York finally has its first licensed retailer. He is Joseph B. Simons, a lawyer from Boston, Massachusetts, who was busted for smoking weed while a high school student in Oneonta. Since that time, one dispensary has opened in my district, Flintstone, which is one of the largest dispensaries in the state, but it's not owned by Mr. Simons. And every time new licenses are publicized, Central New York is among the lowest number of licensees approved relative to the population. So can you explain how licenses are being granted to out-of-state residents, while I have constituents, all of us have constituents who have applied, are ready to go, and they're just waiting?
And obviously Central New York is incredibly important to me. We, in the initial card program, did a geographic breakdown of dispensaries by regional population. Under the initial card program, we were slated to issue 13 dispensaries to Central New York as a representative of the geographic population. Obviously, the litigations have slowed that up. We do now, as we're doing general licensing, folks are able to apply and open up wherever they would like, and break up, based on rest of state and New York City. And so we look to have a lot more operators in the area. I'm incredibly proud of what Flintstone has done. I talk to the operator regularly, and he's been really a standout operator for us in the region. But absolutely, we need more stores in Central New York. But the goal was to have a reflective proportion based on the rest of the population of the state.
And can you speak to the out-of-state?
Well, we are unable to deny licenses, obviously, to people not from New York. The requirement of the initial card program was that folks had a New York conviction, but they didn't have to be residents of the state to get that conviction. Having that such a requirement would violate the Dormant Commerce Clause, and so that actually was the subject of the first lawsuit. Someone who was not from the state and did not have a New York conviction sued the program, saying that they were discriminated against because of it. Even though there's no requirement for a resident of the state to get a license, as evidenced by what you just said. So those are the kind of challenges that we've had to deal with as we rolled out the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hellman.
Thank you, Chairman. Is this on?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Chris, thank you for your testimony. I'm sure this is not going to come as a surprise to you. One of the things you said early on is that we're in a great position to succeed. I just want you to know, based on what I'm hearing, not only from my constituents, but as a member of the subcommittee, I'm hearing from people across the state, they do not feel that way. The stakeholders, the farmers, the processors, none of them, law enforcement, the average citizen, they are not getting the messaging that New York State is in a great position to succeed. Our farmers are losing the shirts off their backs. They're not feeling positive about this. And then I hear all my colleagues talk about the proliferation, and I see them too, of illegal shops. I hear about these discussions we're having today, significant threat to public health, staffing shortages at OCM, limited enforcement capabilities, and again, the distressed farmers. And then I hear our answer, New York State's proposed answer to this is, we're going to issue a large number of licenses in the coming months. I'm not sure that's the complete answer, right? And what I'd like to know is what steps are being taken simultaneously to ensure that these retail outlets are stocked with product that's grown and produced by licensed people, by New York staters. What's being done to help those New York farmers and processors they've followed all the rules. They've done everything that they've been asked to. They've paid all these fees. They've implemented the practices they've been asked to. What's going to ensure that they get their product into those shops and not some out-of-state companies or some big, you mentioned monopolies. And because I'm concerned I'm not going to have enough time to get all my comments out. Also, we talked about, Senator Hinchy brought up the distressed farmers. What are you doing to marry the distressed farmers with these new shops that are opening? And I realize that's a longer term, but something we need to be talking about. And again, just going back to product as well, if I understood what was said today, that half the supply in our state was sold to about 20-ish stores. There were supposed to be 200 stores open by now. So who's managing inventory? Are you sure that when you issue all these new licenses that there's actually going to be enough inventory to meet the demand so that we don't have to draw from, you know, out-of-state companies or people who are going to monopolize the industry?
I'm going to try to respond to that, Senator, as quickly as possible. You know, obviously,
It stinks not being a committee chair because you only get 3 minutes, and I already saw the 30 seconds go up. So you got to try and jam it all out.
No, understood. Absolutely understand. Absolutely, all of our products in our legal shops come from New York farmers as required due to continued federal prohibition. When I do say we're in a good place, I just mean the fact that we have, seasoned our market in a way that allows for those folks who came in first, for those small farmers to really succeed, should we do the work of getting these dispensaries open. This is a supply chain that we've created. When there's a strangle on one side of that supply chain, everybody is impacted. And so what I'm focusing us on is really getting more stores open, because that is the answer. That is why we're issuing more licenses, to get more stores open so that the product has a continued flow through. Otherwise, we're going to keep acting as if we are the knot in the hose, and everybody's going to be impacted by where we are. But I just want to turn to Damien real quick, if you wanted to add something.
Distressed farmers obviously need those stores to be open. What we are working on in the office is programming to help them understand this transition in a way that actually works with where they're at financially. The micro business license has a retail component. A lot of our conditional cultivators have already applied to transition to a micro business license so they can open up retail outlets in their own communities. What we intend to do is to show them over the next few weeks how to do that affordably, or how to do that provisionally, so you can raise some money and do it later down the line. The transition is going to take a year for a lot of these conditional farms.
I'm going to throw this out there. They've already had to file their taxes. They can't even afford to pay their taxes right now. They are in a bad position.
Yep.
So asking them to convert, do different things.
Well, they're asking to convert as well. That change is something that was requested by the farmers to allow them to have more flexibility in their operation.
I will say, as a former hemp farmer who lost a lot of money growing hemp in this state, I am very empathetic with the situation that a lot of these farmers have found themselves in. I'd be in a similar situation right now if I had transitioned, probably. But I do know that it means something that a vegetable farmer sold the first legal product in cannabis, of cannabis in New York State. And that commitment remains in the coming years as well. This market is only going to grow, and those farmers are the foundation of the supply chain.
Thank you. Senator Ryan.
Thank you, Senator Cooney, for putting this hearings together. A few quick things. In July 2022, we visited a farm in Western New York, and I just by happenstance ran into that owner on a construction site, and he's working full-time construction, and he told me how relieved he was that he didn't quit his construction job because he'd be in deep trouble. So, you're hearing a lot of themes regarding that. What are we going to do with the thousands of people in the pipeline, whether growers, processors, right now operating illicitly? Are some of them on the list to become legal operators? And if we can't close them down now when they're illicit, do you envision a scenario where people with licenses are also going to have side businesses that are illicit?
Yeah, one of the initial pieces of information that we had to recognize would not change if we didn't do something about it was that cannabis has been an industry for a long time before OCM existed, before we legalized here in New York. And so we had to find ways to bring that community in to the work instead of trying to fight them. And I'm speaking about, of course, not the shops that you all are seeing today. I think those are folks who are opportunists.
Well, that's what I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
Just so you know, when I'm talking about the thousands of thousands, that aren't people who are in the formerly illegal economy. The people renting offices are not those
Agreed.
folks. These are people with capital. So
Agreed.
are
So
we gonna be able to keep them from having a license and being illicit?
yes, we are able to keep them from transitioning into the adult use market. We do extensive background checks before issuing licenses, and have had
And
many.
that'll be a disqualifier?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I encourage you to keep that going. And the second question I had is about the processors and opening up more processors in the unlimited number of packaging. I think the data showed there's 40 licensed adult use conditional processors, but only half are actually operating. Why are we opening potentially new when the current half are fallow?
Well, I wouldn't say the half are failing. I think there's folks who haven't operated.
Fallow, not being used to their full
Fallow,
extent.
got you. Sorry about that. I would say that what we've seen in the processing tier, folks haven't made yet the full investment in that license, and so I think there's definitely folks who have started the process and are still building out facilities, still securing equipment, et cetera. Of those 40 processes, I do want to just clarify that unlimited expansion that we're doing is really around brands. So it's a Type 3 processing license. It's really a white labeling. In order for somebody to be subject to our rules and our laws, they have to be captured under some form of a license. And so we've created a white labeling license essentially as a vehicle for folks who are less capitalized to have opportunity in this space, but still be subject to our rules. So they have to secure that license. We're not limiting that because we want to see more brands in the state of New York, and they can utilize that to grow their business and then expand to additional processing capabilities that are more capital intensive.
That's good. I would just warn you to keep an eye on oversaturating the extraction process.
Absolutely.
When there's still people not fully using. But thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator Ryan. Senator Rivera.
Hello. All right, I got 3 minutes. I'm going to get right through it. Okay, I got 3 questions. First, as it refers to CAURD as a program, do you believe that we should codify this program?
I didn't hear the sentence.
Apologies. According to the CARUD.
Oh, the card license.
Card life, sorry. The card license. Do you believe that we should codify the program? That's number one.
Well, I mean, obviously the goal of the statute is to create opportunity for those who've been most impacted. That's what we did with the rolling.
Is that a yes or a no? I got 3 minutes. I'm going to cut you off.
Can I speak to that, Linda?
Hey, hi, Linda Lawyer. Yes, no? Can you answer? Mike, please. Mike, please. Quickly. I got 3 minutes. Please.
I think we would be very interested in hearing any proposals from the legislature about.
That's kind of a yes?
Yes, clarifying the Cannabis Control Board's ability or authority to issue new licenses and to do, and that they had the authority to do so in advance of the general adult use license opening.
All right. Thank you. So the rest of it, the short period that I have time, I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about MSOs and ROs, so multi-state operators and registered organizations. The concern, which is, and we've talked about this privately before as well, the concern which is a legitimate one from folks that do not have the ability to have large money that they're sitting on, they're vertically integrated organizations, et cetera. Could you clarify for us how the creation of the regulations that you're putting in place right now, or your actions over the last year, or what have you, how are you, to be very specific as possible, what are you doing to make sure that those registered organizations and multi-state operators are not given more opportunities? Because there's a legitimate concern from folks at every level that they're going to be able to take advantage. So could you be as specific as possible, please?
Absolutely. I think the first of it, of course, is that we started first, for the first 2 years of operations with licensing small farmers, right, as those are the first to grow, so that there's no ability of those other operators to secure, to capture the entirety of the market. We had initially proposed in the draft regulations a delay for those companies transitioning to retail operations. We, through reflection and engagement with the rest of the supply chain, recognized that wasn't really going to effectuate the goal of what we were trying to create. Instead, provisions like a requirement that they carry other people's products is actually more in line with what we need them to be doing as market participants here. Now, we have some pretty tight restrictions on ownership and how much canopy folks can hold, et cetera. And so the design within the rules that we put forward create an avenue where the big companies can be here, but they got to compete with everybody else. And so that's the direction that we chose to go.
Since I only have 8 seconds, I will say that this is obviously a conversation that's going to take more than 2 minutes,
Sure.
but I just want to be on the record that these are legitimate concerns for folks, and you must respond to them,
Absolutely.
as you're doing right now, but more thoroughly.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rivera. I've missed your humming, so thank you for bringing that back to us. Senator Fernandez.
Thank you so much. You mentioned testing and that you go to universities in the state to test product. Is that correct?
No, we independently certify lab or permit labs, and so we have 16 labs that we regulate now who are doing testing for the industry.
Have you found any faulties in those testings? It's been brought to my awareness that some of these private testing facilities have been playing a play-to-pay kind of type form where they authorize their testing to show that it's good, but it may not be bad, or it may be bad. Has there been any finding of these type of practices?
Well, I would say a couple of things. I mean, one, obviously, we audit the process entirely, and so, some of the practices that we see in terms of forum shopping, which folks have done in other states, if there are too many labs available, that's why we've restrained the amount of labs licenses or permits that we issue to ensure that there's not that forum shopping going on. As I speak to, something else that we've done is sampling. We don't allow the operators themselves to decide what goes for testing and what doesn't. We have independent sampling firms that come in, they'll take a sample size of the product to go and put it through testing. What we have done really is advanced standards on testing in a way that other states have not over the last year, including
When it comes to research to potency, that's been a topic that is in discussion, and where I chair the Committee of Alcoholism and Substance Use Disorder, and potency of marijuana now has been said to be much stronger than what it was in the past. Is there a mandate to have education in dispensaries before people buy to know what may be a cause or effect of the potency that exists now?
Absolutely. We already do that now. We produce consumer resources for how to consume cannabis. We put those out in social media. We put those out on our website, YouTube, as well as pamphlets in every dispensary. But there was one other point on potency that actually, you want to talk about the...
Which one?
On potency, the variability.
Yeah, well, the variability of the potency. So, when our farmers are testing their product, they are testing a sample of that product, and so they are given a range of the THC possible, the THC levels of that genetic, of that strain, of that product they're about to sell. And so our THC labeling, they are ranged THC concentrations, but.
And the potency tax is in relation to how high the THC is, correct?
Yeah, it's taxed higher, the higher the levels of
So
THC.
it's been said that the tax may still feed an underground market because the price that is in our dispensaries may still be higher than what is on the street. Is there a plan or discussion in your office to create a compassion program for low-income users to still be able to get clean marijuana?
Well, I think that's a broader question about the potency tax itself and its efficacy as a public health intervention to dissuade folks from sampling higher concentrated, cannabis products. And from our perspective, having a wide array of products available is a good thing. And so, we have, heard the calls to remove the THC potency tax, and, we're here to work with you all as you, make decisions on that. We think that there are definitely ways to still effectuate and get, solid revenue without keeping that in place, should that be the decision of the legislature.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fernandez. Senator Mannion?
Thank you, Senator Cooney. Can you brief? Thank you. Nope. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Senator Cooney. As briefly as possible, can you explain the differences between the scoring for card versus the incubator program and how that relates to service-disabled veterans?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not understanding the question.
I apologize. So as far as I tried to abbreviate it as fast as I could, the differences as far as distributing licenses and the scoring that's involved, differences between the card program and the social economic equity incubator program, and how that relates to service-disabled veterans when that scoring occurs.
So the card program had a scoring criteria that essentially evaluated the individual, if they themselves had the conviction or if a family member had the conviction, because it allowed both to advance as applicants, as well as their previous business experience was also evaluated. I want to say there are plenty of service-disabled veterans in the CARD program. I think we count about 15 or so. So they were definitely able to take advantage of that program. As we move forward to general licensing currently, there's a random ordering that we're doing, essentially prioritizing each equity group equally as the law requires, with the exception of those extra priority folks who themselves have a conviction, are from certain communities, and are making less than 80% of the AMI. So right now, as we move forward, if the question was about comparing the current approach with the previous approach, this is not a scored opportunity, the general licensing window that we're opening now. This is a more of an open opportunity to those who are interested and eligible. Folks can be ineligible because of convictions related to fraud, employment offenses. Certain folks in certain public roles, like law enforcement, are not able to hold those licenses. So we're screening folks for that, and then issuing licenses to those who meet the criteria.
Thank you for that. If I can shift to processing quickly, and I know it was touched upon a little bit by a couple of my colleagues, as far as ensuring that our in-state licensed cultivators and processors are not going to be damaged by the multi-state and legacy operators. Is there anything that the office is doing to ensure that that doesn't happen?
Absolutely, and some of the items I mentioned to Senator Rivera's comment, requirement that our registered organizations carry other people's products to ensure that there's still a representation in those stores is incredibly important. The existing ROs are able to transition into the adult use market, where they will be able to participate in cultivation, processing, and retail, but there's a staggered rollout for their transition into the retail piece of it. I'd also say they're paying a significant fee for that transition. Money is to be used to support future equity programs, which is why the law was structured in that way, tying their participation to that fee that would fund other programs, including loans, et cetera, for other licensees.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mannion. Senator Griffo.
Thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your willingness to serve. I think what I've heard today is not challenges, but litany of problems. And I know Mr. Fagan said that this last year was a trial run. You've indicated that it was working. But what I have is some serious concerns about the structure, the ability to fulfill and undertake the responsibilities commensurate with the law at OCM. And so I'm not sure what we can and should do, but we really need to acknowledge that and to be better prepared to deal with that. So we talk about some of the issues, like with people going to New Jersey or Massachusetts, but I think they're going to illicit shops, not going to New Jersey. Syracuse.com in September indicated that there was dangerous cannabis flooding the market. Law enforcement has raised concerns over the enforcement of the illegal marketplace, which seems to be growing, not being taken out of the picture. So do you believe and do you see the sense of urgency here?
Absolutely.
What can we do to correct this problem now?
Absolutely, Senator. I do see the sense of urgency here. We're living it every day. As I said, I think a solution to many of the problems, both on the supply chain side as well as as it relates to illicit shops, is the opening of more legal shops. Right? That's what, we've got to close the illegal ones and open more legal ones. When folks have a better alternative, as we've seen true in Long Island, for example, folks will go to that shop. They've done incredibly well and likely to be one of the top dispensaries in the country. But we've got to do more to open more across the state so folks have access, and we'll stop going to the shops selling contaminated products that's coming in from other states.
Many local leaders and law enforcement officials have expressed frustration in trying to interact with OCM. What is being done and should be done to improve that type of communication and the ability to work with them to confront the problems in these communities across the state?
We've spent a lot of time doing a lot of education of local law enforcement and the powers that they still have that exist even after we've transitioned. But I want Dan to talk about some of the partnerships that we've had, success stories across the state.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think from my standpoint, every community we've gone into, and whenever we go into a community and we take enforcement actions, the first thing we do before we go in is I reach out to the local law enforcement agency to coordinate, to talk with them and let them know that we're coming in and work in conjunction with them. And I've got nothing but resounding support from every agency I've reached out to. I think that if you spoke with any agency we've dealt with, and we work with, you'll see that, one, the officers, when we leave, are much more educated and understanding of the cannabis industry nowadays. They understand what they can do as far as enforcement goes, and they understand what we can do as far as enforcement goes. And that will continue to roll out. We've got some trainings that we're going to be doing throughout the state that will basically allow OCM, tax, to coordinate with local law enforcement and actually train them further as we go down this process. As we staff up, we'll have a little more bandwidth to do those trainings, because honestly, right now, every one of my investigators is out in the street every single week conducting enforcement actions. But we will continue to work on that. As far as the coordination with other agencies and some of the success stories, just two examples I want to bring out that are kind of quick ones. One, the first collaboration we did was with the New York City Sheriff's Office down in the city. Before we had the enhanced authority to conduct actions against unlicensed locations, we were pretty limited in what we could do. New York City had seen a proliferation of illegal cannabis trucks, the mobile operators throughout the city. We were able to work with the New York City Sheriff and kind of, I think, use some innovative methods with vehicle and traffic law violations and New York City code violations. And we were able to go out with the sheriff and in one day impounded 17 trucks, took all of that cannabis that was in those trucks and seriously hampered that market with the mobile vehicles. And that was before we had the enhanced authority. Since we've had the enhanced authority, I think one of our best examples of what we've done that's been a success story is with Wayne County. We had a particularly egregious operator in Wayne County who had multiple locations. I cold called Sheriff Milby in Wayne County. We had never met with him before.
That was after multiple calls to OCM for help.
Not to me, but...
Maybe not to you, but I've got the whole packet all documented.
Okay, well, from my standpoint, I didn't have any calls that went unanswered from the sheriff. When we were going out to do enforcement in Wayne County, I reached out to Sheriff Milby, and his response was nothing but support, as I'm sure you know. He offered the use of his facility for our pre-meeting with multiple agencies to go do our enforcement. He gave us as many uniformed deputies to conduct our enforcement. When we went out and did the enforcement, the deputies assisted us in operating. After we had done that, the operator of this location, or actually multiple locations, was very adamant that he was not going to heed our cease orders. And it became evident that we were going to have to go and use the injunctive relief that we were authorized to use. Sheriff Milby continued to give us manpower out in Wayne County with the deputies, advised us when these stores were open again, and that collaboration between the agencies was instrumental in getting the first successful restraining order and closing order, temporary, of these 7 locations. And we were able to go out and physically put padlocks on those doors. But Senator, to your point, anyone that has reached out and spoken with enforcement, and we have an email that is strictly for law enforcement agencies to contact us. If you go onto our website, there at the bottom of the website, there's a report an incident tab where anyone can, the public and law enforcement can make referrals to us. And the referrals
So our time
that we get
has
from law
elapsed,
enforcement,
and Mr. Chairman, I
right.
know that, and I appreciate that, and I just want to close with this, because I think there's still great frustration out there, and I think there's still room for improvement, and you need to improve because it's essential. And I would just say, these are not challenges, these are problems. They need to be addressed and corrected.
Thank you, Senator Griffo. Chair now recognizes Senator Rowlison.
Thank you, Senator Cooney. In reference to the application process, we've had a couple calls with your team, and thank you for that in the lead up to this hearing, and giving some priorities or some consideration for applicants who have leases, who actually have locations where they'll be able to create new facilities, new buildings, or have an existing building. My question is that with your team, how much background is done so individuals are not making that claim and then potentially getting a license or moving the process forward, tying up your staff? I mean, do you have the resources to do those background checks, as Senator Ryan was talking about, with individuals who are bad actors? We're going to try to get into this thing legally as these applications tend to open up a bit more now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the strategies, as I think we've all talked about today, is we need to open more retail stores. So one of the kind of innovative ideas was One of the things we saw with the provisional licenses and card is finding your compliant retail space, going through the proximity protections, and getting your local approval is significant time. And so having an application focused on folks who have spaces already, we're hoping to speed up getting these stores open in early 2024. But absolutely, reviewing these leases and conditional leases is a major part of what the licensing team and the enforcement team does when the applications come in. There's also attestations on the application where every licensee is claiming that everything that's submitted is true and accurate, and we hold people to that. And so if there's evidence found out later on that they were lying or unable to operationalize their license, then there's actions we can take. And the last point I'll mention is there's a 30-day cure period with these applications, and if an applicant is unable to demonstrate the required materials in that 30 days, their application gets voided. So there is a little bit of a check on that process as well as we work throughout these.
And just as a quick follow-up, with the cure period, if they don't answer, they don't provide the additional documentation that they need to justify the fact that they're in line to get a license, are they then really effectively out of the system, that they cannot reapply under a different name? Just because, again, what I concerned about, and obviously my colleagues have expressed some really great concerns here this afternoon, is that you don't want to be overloaded having to chase the same people out as you're trying to bring people in. And thank you.
No, absolutely, and that touches upon probably something maybe people have brought up to you, but it's our True Party of Interest, or TPI regulations, and we borrowed really heavily from SLA and ABC law here just to ensure there's a two-tier market, which is one of the main foundational aspects of our market to support small businesses, to ensure that someone can't dominate the entire supply chain. But part of that means that we ask a lot of questions about who's owning these businesses, who's indirectly owning that, from financiers to passive investors. And so all that information is being collected upfront at the time of application, and then basically going into a Google system to help us identify like names, social security numbers among different licensees, so we can flag and investigate those instances where someone might be violating our regulations or law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Allison. Senator Matera.
Hello, can you hear me good? And thank you guys so much for your testimony today. And quick question, because I only have a couple minutes. Quarterly audits, are we looking into doing for these dispensaries any kind of audits quarterly, any time frame?
Yeah, I mean, we get a pretty regular reporting from our dispensaries. As you know, the product is moving through the entirety of a supply chain, and we're seeing, how much product is moving from a cultivator processor through a distributor to these retailers. And so absolutely, but it's less than a kind of an audit. It's an ongoing observation. We don't turn away from their operations as they go. So absolutely, we'll fine tune and make sure.
I'm recommending for quarterly audits, please. I think it's very, very important. The other thing is, how much does it cost in New York State right now for all this enforcement, and how many agents do we have in the whole New York State? I'd like to know, especially me living on Long Island, how many agents do we have? Just a couple agents? 4, 5, 10, 100? And how much does this cost in all New Yorkers for this enforcement of agents?
I'd have to get back to you on the cost. As I've said, we do a lot of collaboration, and so our agents work with DTF, with New York City Sheriff, et cetera, and local law enforcement. So while we have relatively few, the way that it works is we just create these teams, to take actions across the state.
So how many agents do we have?
Where's the count?
So
approximately.
I've shied away from giving numbers on public just for operational security, because that does speak to, if you know how many we have at any given time, we're throughout the state.
Well, that'd be great for the criminal to know that there's a lot of agents out there, so maybe that would help a little.
And we use, as Chris mentioned, we use other agencies
all right.
as a force
Next question,
multiplier.
25%, and thank you so much for not answering that. 25% of revenue that we think that we're gonna be receiving here in New York State will be allocated to drug rehab facilities. What are we doing to help our law enforcement that's getting involved with all this? Are they receiving any kind of money?
Yeah,
Any kind of compensation for what they're doing?
Yeah, so for the real focus for us at the start of this was expanding our ability to maintain road safety. And so we've allocated $5 million to state police. And other local law enforcement for expansion of the DRE program.
Going into Christmas tree lightings, and you're sitting there and you're smelling all this with a
Maybe it is. Yes, it sounds like it is. Thank you. Chris, does OCM track how many unlicensed stores are operating in the state?
We don't, but the sheriff has, we work with the sheriff and they've been tracking, at least for the city, but we don't track the total number across the state.
Do you have any estimate of the number of unlicensed stores
I know
operating?
that there's been a number of estimates that have been kind of floated out there. From what I've seen, I don't know anyone that's done a physical hard count across the state. So I've been very.
What's your best estimate?
Over 1,000. But again, our efforts are focused on the enforcement, not going out and counting the stores. When we encounter them, we.
And second quick question, from the initial inspection, how long does it take to reach the hearing where penalties are issued? And from the time of getting a complaint about an unlicensed shop, how long does it take OCM to respond to an initial inspection? Do you have any sense of the time frame?
It does vary based on, we're using, or kind of moving our enforcement teams throughout the state. So if I got a complaint in Syracuse and we were operating in Syracuse, it could be a quicker turnaround, but if we're not in that area at the time, it could be a few weeks or longer.
And one final question. Is it possible, Chris, for you to delegate your authority for inspections to another entity or agency like a local municipality? And would that be helpful for you to do that?
We can delegate a component of our powers. The component is the ability to go in front of state Supreme Court and ask for a closure order. We call it, it's 16A, Section 16A of the cannabis law drafted with the new enforcement powers. And so we can delegate the ability to go and request a temporary or permanent closure. And so that's what we're working with the Attorney General to do for municipalities across the state, and that's what we're also training municipalities to operationalize going after closures through that power. Essentially, it's a similar approach to local nuisance laws, but it's a statewide nuisance law that's more efficient and that other folks can take advantage of. So that's the part that we can delegate.
Thank you, Senator Coleman. Senator Fernandez?
been said many times that we have to open more stores. So for the current card applicants that have one store, they're only allowed one store. Has there been any discussion about allowing a card applicant to have maybe up to 3 stores?
So every licensee is able to hold, subject to our ownership restrictions, up to 3 licenses. Each license now is a license per store. And so we're not giving out second and third licenses, as you stated. For the card licensees themselves, we have instructed them to reapply in this license window, as you're only able to apply for a license that you can actually hold. And so for our
per location, it's 1 license?
Yes. Yeah, so we're not issuing the second and third licenses. We've asked folks to reapply, which doesn't violate our rules, but also gives us maximum flexibility as we continue to work through litigation.
That's okay. Thank you, Senator Fernandez. Senator Ryan.
Thank you. A technical question on, in order to have an application, you need to demonstrate ownership of real property. And that can be a time-consuming and sometimes expensive. Have you thought about that being an impediment, and a property contract, letter of intent could replace actual ownership?
Yeah, so on the retail side of things, and not the rest of it, but on the retail side of things, you are able to secure a license without having control of property. And we use site control, so a lease or deed, not actually having to have the deed. And so we're able to advance folks through a provisional pathway where they use the license to get investors, get more capital, and then of course secure a location. The path that we were talking about earlier was really a pathway to jumpstart and get more stores open for folks who already have locations under their control. And for that, they have to show a conditional lease.
What about the rest of it?
So for the rest of the market, you do have to have site control, but it also is satisfied with the conditional lease or deed. They don't have to own the building.
Okay. And then theoretically, we have at least 1,000 illicit operators out there. Do you think we're going to be able to put this genie back into the bottle to actually have a regulated marijuana distribution, or has it tipped over in a way that we're not getting it back?
No, not without greater coordination and collaboration. As I said, this is all hands on deck. We've pulled in DOL recently. We pulled in the landlords themselves, tried to utilize their powers to get some evictions. We need everybody participating and helping with this effort. This is not something that we ourselves will be able to shut down. But I do think that we're starting to see more folks jump in, the DAs, for example, in the city, pursuing nuisance cases, working with landlords to force evictions. That has upticked. We've also seen, more recently in Syracuse, some action that was taken, with our team, but they also took some additional regulatory action to padlock that is necessary and helpful. But we've got to see more of that across the state, but we'll keep driving it.
I agree with a coordinated effort. I think, that is the approach, but I am concerned that market forces do take hold. And, the longer it goes until the licensed folks are out there, it's gonna make those illicit stores become powerful and become part of the community and have, pipelines and probably signing contracts. So we really got to get a giddy up on making that coordinated effort happen.
Absolutely.
And 100% agree with you, Senator. But one anecdote I like adding when talking about timeline of adult use rollout is New York, for some benefit, was not the first state to do this. So it's kind of interesting to look at other states and see where they are at different checkpoints to kind of measure yourself on where you are. So Washington State legalized in 2014, one of the first states to legalize. And one of the interesting things that I noticed is it took until 2020 for them to get 90% of the cannabis that's consumed in Washington to be bought by the legal market. So it is something that transitions over time, even in a state that maybe didn't have the illicit market challenges that we had, but it is still, it's not a switch you can flip overnight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ryan. Senator Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the great things about having these hearings online is that folks out there in the universe, not just folks in the room, can see it. So I got a text message from a friend of mine who is far more experienced about this than I am, and he says the following, and I wanted you to respond, related to requiring carry other people's products. does not say, referring to the regulations, does not say where on the shelf those products have to be, if the bud tenders have to tell customers about them, and also the ROs can change whatever they want, so they can carry 50% of the products and charge 500 on 1/8 for them, so no one ever buys it. The wiggle room makes the regulation totally pointless, unquote. So what would you say to that? What would you
I mean, I
respond to?
disagree firmly that it makes the regulation ineffective. Yes, you know, a store owner is able to decide where certain products go on their shelves, of course. And of course, if that store owner is producing some of the products that are on those shelves, yeah, they've got a say in that. That being said, what we've done is tie the success of those companies up with everybody else, because you have to carry those products, which means that you got to move them, right? And so I push back.
But does
strongly.
it though? Does it mean you have to move them?
Absolutely.
You have to.
You want to move them, yeah.
But hold on, because you do. I understand as far as requiring for them to be in the store.
Yeah.
But as far as, and again, this is just
No,
one
no,
text.
I understand.
So are the regulations have enough wiggle room so that I'm gonna put it on my shelf, but I'm gonna charge 10 times more than I do for something else, so it's never gonna move. So is there a requirement also that not only do they have to be on the shelves? I mean, a supermarket can carry corn pops. It doesn't mean that they're gonna sell. Like, it's not,
No, I
you understand what I'm
understand.
saying?
Yeah, no,
Is there a
I'm just
response to
saying,
that?
It has to be listed on their website. It's what they carry. So it's on their website, it's in their system. When you walk into a store, you will have a POS system where you can pick from whatever you want to buy. It has to be listed there. So it's ultimately up to the consumer. Yeah, I suppose they could try and put a plant in front of it, but it's available, it's on the shelf, and they would have every incentive to sell it to make as much money as possible.
Cool. I don't think you've answered the question, but that's fine. I got a couple other things. So as far as one of the things to suggest is that you've defaulted to a lottery system to hand out the licenses. That's accurate, right?
So what we're doing is a combination of the law has a goal of getting 50% equity representation, right?
Yeah.
We've seen in states like Massachusetts, they try to hand one license to an equity entrepreneur and one to someone who's not an equity. That didn't realize the goals. And so what we're doing is a combination of special programs like the conditional cultivator program, like CARD, with open opportunities. That combination is to expand opportunities so everybody has access, but the only way we get close to that goal is if we really look at it as a floor and not the ceiling. So CARD, for example, obviously 100% of people in that program were folks who had convictions. Largely, overwhelmingly represented that group were also folks who were MWBEs, who grew up in CDIs, our communities disproportionately impacted, et cetera. And so we have to combine those special programs with open opportunities in order to really get to the saturation point we need.
Gotcha. My time is done, so I'll have some more follow-ups afterwards. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hinchey.
Thank you very much. Damien, it's great to hear the recommitment on the record that our farmers are the foundation of this industry. It's unfortunate, though, that many of them may be out of business by the time we get more stores open. I want to follow up on a couple of things, but one, Chris, at the end, it sounded like you guys said that there's been no crop loss.
The statement, I wasn't saying there was no crop loss. I was just giving the numbers I was providing was numbers that flew through the supply chain and numbers that's
involved. That's a high cost. And for some of the charges, they're low-level charges because we're not looking to recriminalize cannabis. And also the DA's offices, from what I've seen, have been not looking to jump into recriminalizing as well. So I think that the enforcement role does sit with OCM. And, you know, I think it's important to highlight, we didn't get everything that we had asked for. There was pretty robust negotiation when we were going through and got the expanded authority. And I think the takeaway after that was, while it was a fantastic first step and it gave us the jurisdiction and the ability to do regulatory inspections is huge. It's a huge responsibility.
Right.
It's something that we are very cognizant of not turning into a police function. This is an administrative function, the ability to go in, conduct the inspection, and deal with the shops.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it has to function in terms of shutting down these stores.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the takeaway, I think, after the law was changed was, okay, you've got that starting point. We have to come back to the table and see what additional steps may have to be taken. And I think now we have a significant subset of examples of what we have to do, and obviously it's not matching with public expectation, not matching with our expectation of how we get these shops closed in the quickest manner possible. So I think that is something that we're absolutely going to have to address going
We
forward.
welcome the ability to partner with you and think about how we can do better on that. Cannabis Growers Showcase, I read the report. I know it's going well. I just visited one that opened in Senator Helming's district this past Friday. Is there a plan to extend that beyond December 31st, 2023?
Yeah, I mean, we've really looked to transition that into a more standing kind of events. We've got a lot of lessons learned from these initial operations, and just trying to get that implemented as quickly as possible and in front of the board.
Yeah, it seems to be going well, and so
Yeah.
when there's something working, let's keep doing it. In terms of, someone mentioned on the panel earlier, the ROs, the medical operators. I know, Director Alexander, you talked about the new regulations got approved, I think, in July of this year. Are those going to be published at any time soon for medical operators?
Oh, the medical regulations.
The
yeah,
revised
absolutely.
regulations.
They should be published.
Next Thursday or Wednesday.
Next Thursday, next Wednesday. Okay, thank you on that. That's up for me. Thank you so much for your time today and the work that you've done leading up to today. And obviously, this is just the continuation of the conversation we'll have going forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move to our second panel. And we have Dr. Chin, who serves as the Vice Chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board. We welcome you to join us here at the table. Okay, we're going to move on to our second panel. Everyone could please take their seats. We have Dr. Janella Chin, who serves as the Vice Chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board. Thank you, Dr. Chin, for joining us today, and if you would please give your opening comments for 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you to Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Senate Cannabis Subcommittee Chair Jeremy Cooney, Finance Chair Liz Kruger, Agricultural Chair Michelle Hinchy, and Government Operations Chair James Skoufis for the invitation to present testimony today. I stand before you today in my role as the co-chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board and the chair of the Health, Safety, and Research Subcommittee, and more broadly as an integrative medicine specialist with over 15 years of clinical experience. And I bring a unique perspective to cannabis-based therapies that incorporates the lessons of data science, crowdsource experiential knowledge, and individualized treatment strategies. Through my work as an advisor for several cannabis startup companies, I consult with industry leadership, and I speak at conferences for the industry and internationally. I also put together cannabinoid formulations, research programs, education, training programs for colleagues. I have direct patient care experience, and I do work as a registered practitioner for the New York State Medical Cannabis Program. And I've seen the benefit of medical cannabis firsthand, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the profound impact cannabis can have on patient outcomes. And I just want to share with you an email that I received last week. Dear Dr. Chin, I'm a single parent of a 21-year-old son named Jackson who's diagnosed with autism and epilepsy. All of the kids my son grew up with have graduated college, started new jobs. Some of them are married, starting their own families, while others are traveling the world. And I look on with envy and sadness. These parents have freedom. Their kids are independent enough to start their own lives. Well, on good days, I spend my time playing in the sandbox and stacking alphabet blocks, lining up match cars, just like we did when Jackson was 3. On bad days, he endures about 30 or more absent seizures, and I'm busy patching up drywall, fixing broken doors and windows from his destructive tantrums. I no longer have a healthy social life. I no longer respond to party invitations, weddings, or birthdays. I spend my free time researching various therapies and medications that might give Jackson peace of life, quality, and I live in fear of his uncontrollable, unpredictable violent outbursts. I stare at the bite marks and the bruises from fighting off Jackson, and we can't go on living like this. Jackson's neurologist and psychiatrist stated that we have exhausted all pharmaceutical medications, and I asked about medical cannabis. I didn't want to experiment blindly on my own or go into some random cannabis shop, so they referred me to your clinic. Please help. Now, we know the situation is truly heart-wrenching, and our clinic regularly receives hundreds of emails like this one. But our course of action is clear. We will continue working closely with the OCM to strengthen New York's medical and adult use programs, and we really need to continue to ensure patient access while upholding safety, compliance, health equity to protect the most vulnerable individuals in our community. So as co-chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board, I'm here to represent a diverse group of cannabis industry stakeholders and subject matter experts as we begin the Herculean task of advising the OCM, both on the dissemination of Community Grants Reinvestment Fund and the rollout of adult use, medical, and cannabinoid hemp industries. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we have a strong relationship starting in researching, understanding the issues ahead of us, and we're working to develop the processes that will be used by the advisory board for decades to come. And lastly, as chair of the Health, Safety, and Research Subcommittee, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the importance of funding and prioritizing cannabis research. The OCM has created Cannabis Research License, and under that structure, I am envisioning a future where New York State is the cornerstone of cannabis research, where we work to answer questions related to the cannabis plant, to the medicine, so that others can benefit. But we need the support from legislator and the state to ensure these efforts receive prioritization and funding truly to make an impact and change lives. And I welcome more discussion in this arena as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chin. Before we go forward, if I could ask the Sergeant of Arms to keep our back door closed, because the sound does carry in here, and want to be respectful of all of our panelists today. And I ask our audience to be respectful of the noise as well. Thank you, Dr. Chin, for your opening statements. Just a couple of questions for myself. How many members are there on the Cannabis Advisory Board to date?
So we have various members and we have various subcommittees. Right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13.
13. And I've been impressed by the diversity that sits on the board from different backgrounds. Do you feel, in your opinion as co-chair, that the Cannabis Advisory Board is able to provide meaningful advice to the Office of Cannabis Management? And if not, how can we improve that? How could we help you improve that?
Well, I do want to emphasize that the CAB is comprised of really a broad array of industry experts representing different corners, right, of the cannabis landscape. So in the course of 16 months, so pretty short, the CAB has been fully appointed. We have been meeting with the office for work, so we've rolled up our sleeves. We're super excited. It would be helpful if we had funding for a dedicated staff member from the OCM to facilitate meetings, to facilitate better communication between the CCB and the OCM. We are working to develop formal processes to ensure the transfer of critical knowledge. So for example, for the Health, Safety, and Research Committee, I've worked with both Public Health, Safety, and Research Deputy Directors to make sure that we are looking at issues like education, lab testing, prevention of accidental consumption, and how to foster and engage research. So we've met a handful of times.
And in that capacity as chair of the Health and Safety Committee, in terms of the labs that we currently have, I think there's 16 maybe online right now. Do you feel that that is meeting the need, or do we have more? Do we need to give out more licenses for more labs? Because there's been, as you heard from this panel before, a couple of concerns that either product is getting through the labs and it's not meeting the safety standards that were outlined originally. Can you comment on that at all?
I think it would be helpful, of course, to have more labs, but I did note, you know, for me as a physician, I'm always looking at what are the adverse events that are reported, and I noticed from the adult use there are 0 adverse events. From the medical ROs, there were 4 adverse events, and from the illicit market, there are 73% adverse events. So that is important to note.
Thank you. Perhaps if we had more retail operations open, we would have more events, hopefully not, but clearly continues to be an issue and on our mind, certainly. I'll open it up for questions from the panel. Senator Krueger.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. So I was interested in the letter you received recently that you read to us. So was the point of the mother's concern that she didn't have any access at all to medical cannabis wherever she was living with her child? Or was that there wasn't enough information available to her about protocols in medical cannabis that might or might not be helpful to her? I think it was her son.
That's a great question. So because she is a single mom and she has to see both a neurologist and a psychiatrist, it was very inconvenient for her to go out of her network to find a physician, a health practitioner that understands cannabinoid formulations, which means she was reaching out to my clinic versus staying within her network and continuity of care. So what we have been working in is expanding the medical ROs, making sure that underserved and unserved needs communities are met with more practitioner education.
Thank you. So I certainly have been familiar with, and I've talked to our health chair who's here today, Gustavo Rivera, about the fact that many of the networks we have in place in the state of New York often don't have a diverse enough collection of medical professionals to meet the needs of people who are signed up for them. Do you know from your experience, is there just I mean, I think there are more and more physicians who are signing up to be able to prescribe marijuana, so to speak. So do we think, or in your experiences, that the networks themselves aren't recognizing this field and aren't making sure they have adequate numbers of doctors within their networks that have experience in the correct cannabis product recommendations?
That's a great question, Senator. What I've noticed actually with the adult use rollout, more practitioners are wanting to become educated because they realize with or without their consent, patients and consumers are going to go and have access to cannabis, and they would like to be part of the conversation.
And I know that when we were developing the original legislation, we were very interested in making sure we did put money aside to invest in New York State doing its own research about the uses of medical cannabis. And you mentioned that, I guess that's still being an RFP process, or have we gotten past that? Has somebody been actually awarded a contract to do this work for the state of New York?
I believe that the regulations are set, and so we are working to initiate OCM-led research studies, collaborations with external researchers, and hopefully in 2024, we are talking about statewide cannabis research conference as well. So
Great.
really educating the community and practitioners.
And also, I think because of all my work around the bill for many years, I had an opportunity to speak to many professional physicians like yourself who were doing their own informal research, because we make it so hard to do research on cannabis in this country for ridiculous reasons. But also we're working off of the research findings from other countries who we quote unquote respect for their research, Canada, England, Germany, Israel, and they all seem to have done so much really solid research. Are we as physicians, I'm not a physician, you as physician, are you able to use that research to help guide you in what you think you should be recommending for different patients?
Absolutely, and there are medical centers like NYU Langone Epilepsy Center, Mount Sinai. We are collaborating with other practitioners, on our own to share research, to share patient cases, journal clubs, for instance. So the information is there.
It is there. Great. And where's your clinic?
We're in Westchester and Midtown.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Senator Hoylman.
Thank you. Wanted to ask you, Dr. Chin, if the Cannabis Advisory Board, I think you're the only physician on it, do you discuss anything about the unlicensed product and maybe provide advice to OCM about your concerns, if you have any, about unlicensed product? Let me start with that. Do you have concerns about the unlicensed product that's on the streets in New York City?
Of course, I actually get calls, dozens of calls on a daily basis. I purchased this gummy at a shop nearby, and what do you think about it? And first I say, well, there is a program through New York State where you can recognize regulated dispensaries. What you're showing me is not from a regulated dispensary if you got it from the corner shop bodega. So there's education that's there. I think part of that is the Why Buy Legal campaign, which has been very, very effective for patients and consumers. But we do talk about more outreach to practitioners as well, because practitioners sometimes don't know about the Why Buy Legal campaign, and the patients will find out first.
So practitioners are purchasing from illegal shops?
No, patients, if they're purchasing from illegal shops and they're asking practitioners need to be able to recognize which are the legal versus the illicit shops.
Yeah, it's maddening. I mean, there's one on 72nd Street, which puts itself out as a licensed shop. The sign says we are licensed, and they're not. And so what is a consumer to do? I mean, not every consumer can go to their doctor or you and find out what's legal and what's not.
Right.
So is the board of which you're a member, are you raising these concerns with OCM?
We are, and that's why they're strengthening the Why Buy Legal campaign. As we have our meetings and we give feedback from the community, from my patients, we do have ongoing conversations about that.
And finally, if I may ask, what are the concerns from a medical standpoint for a young person or anyone purchasing an illegal product? Like what have you seen the effects of an illegal dose for an individual?
I think for my population and for a lot of my colleagues, our patients are 65 and over. So we are worried about vulnerable populations that are on multiple prescription medications, perhaps they're living alone, and they're using perhaps cannabis medicine at too high of a dose. And, they try to get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and they fall, they stumble. So we know, cannabis is relatively safe, but if mixed with other prescription medications, or if there's a fall precaution, there could be some dangers there. Also, vulnerable populations, I'm a mom. We think about our youth. I know there's a big campaign, public health campaign within the OCM about to parents, how to talk to your teenagers, how to talk to young adults about cannabis medicine, what it does to executive cognition. Also, driving while intoxicated is also a big campaign through the OCM. And that's really the best we can do, is really to educate the public in a responsible way.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hoylman. Senator Fernandez?
Thank you so much. You mentioned that the medical field is needing to get more educated on the usage of marijuana. Is there a shortage of now patients going to doctors seeking marijuana prescriptions?
I don't think there's a shortage of
No, or has
patients
it
going,
lessened?
because patients do ask. I think there's a shortage of practitioners being well-equipped to have the conversation with the patients. I know we are working on a medical symposium in 2024 with oncologists, gastroenterologists, rheumatologists, so really expanding the specialties and not just looking at pain and opiate mitigation for patient conversations and their specialists. So maybe looking at IBS, women's health, for example, autism.
What options are available to practitioners to give to low-income marijuana users or those that are medicinal users, veterans, other HIV, AIDS patients that might need and want but cannot afford? What are the options that are currently available?
I love that you asked that question. With the expansion of the medical program, the medical ROs, these new applicants coming on board has to show that they are medically, culturally, and linguistic competent, and they are serving underserved areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fernandez. Senator Skoufis.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And good afternoon. Yes, we're in the afternoon. Dr. Shin. Just one question. Do you feel that there's anything that the board has felt particularly strong about that you all recommended or advised to OCM that the board was not sufficiently heard on?
I'm sorry, ask that again?
Sorry, I asked that very inartfully. The question is there anything that the board has contemplated that you all then passed along to OCM as advice, as a recommendation, as thoughts that you and or the board has felt OCM was not responsive to?
No. What we would love is just more meetings to be able to have more FaceTime with the CCB and OCM.
Okay.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Rollison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shin, it's good to see you, and thank you for coming to this hearing. You brought up a really great point, and that is the access to the right product. And when we know about the proliferation of many of these stores, and as we just heard from our colleague, Senator Hoylman-Siegel, about a store in New York that says they're licensed.
Mm-hmm.
So just from a background perspective, if I'm a physician and I'm treating someone's come to me and believe that medical marijuana or whatever product it is would help them with whatever they're dealing with, do physicians and individuals in the health field, and this would have been a question for OCM, but I didn't think about it then, have access to where they could be pointed to, especially if you're in
if you want.
How about just one example that you think was essential to, standing up programs or whatever it might be, or enforcement?
Yeah, so for example, I was really, for Health, Safety, and Research Committee, I can speak about that. I was really concerned about youth poison and gummies of illicit shops. So we started digging in and looking at poison control. We started looking at if there were any reports in the ERs on basically accidental consumption of gummies in the youth. And the OCM, Health and Safety and Research and Public Health Deputy Director, has been very open with helping us gather more public health information so we can connect the dots.
And in the other direction, has OCM come to the board and asked for advisement or insight or tasked the board with any actions, any specific asks of the board as far as their input on establishing regulations or policies?
Yes, we do that at every meeting. So in our last meeting for the community grant reinvestment, we talked about funding proposals, making recommendations to the OCM for voting, what type of focus communities do we have, accountable stakeholders, for example. So we did have those discussions, and we're going to come back to them with recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mannion. Senator Hinchey.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Doctor, for being here. Senator Helming actually opened the door to my first question. I too represent a very rural district, and access to health care of all kinds is severely lacking, to put it lightly. We need every tool available, and I personally believe cannabis is one of those tools. So can you speak to anything about doctors being trained in rural areas, or how many stores, or medical, particularly, how many medical stores are open in rural areas and how that's played out?
I think that's why they expanded the medical program, so that we can make sure that the underserved areas are being met. And I know that the new expansion, the potential medical ROs have to show their history in serving those areas. I think that's the biggest thing. Also, for us working on the medical symposium, looking at med students, looking at medical schools, so really looking at from a, even before you become a practitioner, I think is helpful.
Definitely. And is there any, I don't know if this is your role, but is there any communication or plan to then encourage folks to go into rural communities to either educate or set up facilities and stores in rural areas that are not being served currently?
Yes, that's embedded in the new medical RO expansion. Correct.
Okay, thank you. And I just asked the board to continue to think about some of the rural areas and the lack
Absolutely.
of access and education specifically. I also ask for the upcoming research plans and the symposium that you've talked about, and maybe this is already included, I just didn't hear it in the short list that you rattled off, but dementia care and dementia treatment. Is that
Yes.
something that you're looking at?
Yes, Alzheimer's, dementia, yes, and working with skilled nursing facilities, hospice and palliative care practitioners as well.
Great, that's something that I'm very interested in. Again, that's actually something that where we use medical cannabis, and it was incredibly helpful in our personal story. And so any information or next steps on that you can provide us would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and also delivery to the skilled nursing facilities. That's what we are expanding as well.
Great, thank you. It's good to know. Would love to learn more.
Okay, thank you, Senator Hinchey, and I'll echo her comment about dementia. It's certainly an opportunity for us and so many families who are going through that process. Thank you, Dr. Chin, for the work that you're doing as co-chair of the Cannabis Advisory Board, and we hope that you'll continue to communicate with us moving forward. Thank you. We'll now move to our next panel, panel 3, which will be Charlie Williams, Vice President of the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York. Is being passed out to the Senate. Thank you very much for submitting written testimony. Just a reminder that we ask you to try your best to keep your opening remarks at 3 minutes. We will have this to be able to review, but if you could keep it to 3 minutes and then we can spend more time with Q&A, we'd appreciate that. Although I know you're doing a lot and you have a lot to say. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And please begin, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Cooney and members of the Cannabis Subcommittee. Chairs Kruger, Skoufis, Chair Kruger left, and Hinchy. Thank you for extending the invite to join and present at this hearing today. My name is Charlie Williams. I'm Vice President at the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, or DASNY. Joining me is our Nadine Fontaine, who is our General Counsel. And in the crowd are some other staff from DASNY as well, who your staff has spoken to with some frequency. You're all familiar with DASNY, but let me just briefly say, DASNY is engaged in 3 primary lines of business: construction management, financing, and grants management. In 2023, we have managed so far more than 1,000 construction projects statewide. We've issued $2.6 billion in bonds, and we've executed on 800 grant disbursement agreements under the many programs the legislature and the governor have enacted for support to municipalities and not-for-profits. DASNY's 460 employees are located primarily in Albany. We have offices in New York City, Buffalo, and Rochester, and we have field staff in every region of the state working on construction projects, so they're remote field staff. For social equity entrepreneurs, one of the greatest barriers that's been identified is access to capital. Governor Hochul had the foresight to propose, and you all had the foresight to pass, the New York State Social Equity Cannabis Investment Fund in April of 2022. And the whole intent behind that program is to support social equity entrepreneurs with capital to build dispensaries. So we created the fund, and the fund is the first of its kind in the nation. There's no other state that is engaged in this type of public effort, and no one has raised the funding that's been raised under this program. So it's new, and we've already started significant work on it. The state approved a $50 million initial investment, which is ultimately paid back through cannabis revenue to the general fund. And the fund itself was able to secure a $150 million commitment from Chicago Atlantic. So the fundraising part was finally completed in June of 2023. It is the largest, as said, the largest social equity investment in the country. DASNY began by creating a subsidiary, a Social Equity Servicing Corporation, to serve as agent to the fund. So our primary function is as agent to the Social Equity Fund. We find properties, negotiate leases, execute the leases, engage in the build, and ultimately service both the loans and the rental agreements on behalf of the fund. When this was enacted in April 22, we immediately began work. We engaged in numerous procurements. So we did the fund procurement to select the fund manager, which is Siebert Shank and Weber Willis. We have selected the design build firms. I think there's 10 or 12 different design build firms that we can select from to build out dispensaries. We issued RFPs for banking services, point of sale systems, and several others. So we started work immediately. As that work on the RFPs started, we had to begin the real estate identification process. So the Social Equity Servicing Corporation, SESC, DASNY's subsidiary, worked very long process, key trade areas around the state where we wanted to seek properties. So that started really with a funnel of 10,000 commercial retail properties around the state. Now, things have to be, that is a big funnel at the top, and it narrows pretty quickly. Once you investigate proximity to schools, proximity to churches, maybe existing medical dispensaries, that trims the funnel down significantly. Then you have to look at mortgage conditions. They might be a federally mortgaged bank, or a bank might be federally chartered and not allowed to have that sort of operation in there. It might be a condo ownership, and the condo board might not want cannabis. Then you have to assess the landlord's interest. They may or may not be interested in having a cannabis retail shop in their establishment. Or they may be uncomfortable with this new concept of this public-private partnership that we're engaged in. So there's a lot of work done with landlords. And just to give you a sense of that, the first tranche they looked at was 2,300 properties. By the time you got to the bottom of that evaluation, we ended up with about 150 RFIs that we sent out to landlords to gauge their interest, and about half of them came back. So it's an intensive effort to find these ideal locations and the correct sort of environment for a dispensary, and it really does narrow down quickly. So when we got into the fall and started negotiating with sites, it's when the first injunction came along, and that was a federal court case came along. The injunction came in. While that injunction was put in place in September of 2022, get my ears straight, Nadine? In September of 2022, while that injunction went in place, we were also seeing a lot of localities that were creating code and land use regulations that really tightly constrained retail dispensaries in their communities. And what the end result of the sort of local zoning and the injunction was, only about half the state's population was really a potential target for the fund. And that threw a big sort of wrench in the works in identifying locations. So that slowed us down significantly. Notwithstanding that, in December of 22, we began signing leases with dispensaries. We rolled forward, we've signed about 24 or 26 leases at this point, but as we went through the summer, started issuing work orders, started building out dispensaries, we got another set of lawsuits. Now that second set of lawsuits has injuncted the entire state and doesn't allow OCM to take any action on behalf of CARD. The way the process works, you sign a lease, OCM matches an operator to that lease, and then we finish the build out, using the operator's desires about branding and, certain selections of finishes and colors. We build it out. OCM's not able to match any additional CARD licensees to the dispensaries at this point while the litigation's ongoing. So that really put a hard freeze on the real estate effort. We continue to build out the ones that we have leases signed for.
Mr. Wills, I ask you to kind of move it along here.
Yep.
And thank you.
So I will say the last injunction knocked out probably about, but setting that aside for a moment. SCSC and DASNY are completely focused on the success of the New York State Social Equity Cannabis Investment Fund. It's one of a kind, public-private partnership, and we are focused on the success of our equity entrepreneurs. This is a new industry governed by a new agency, and we have a new concept with our investment structure and a new public-private partnership. There's a lot new here, but both DASNY, SCSC, and the fund are committed to its success. The fund itself does a lot of additional services, things that weren't anticipated they would do at the outset. Capacity building, shoulder-to-shoulder mentoring during and immediately after opening. They found banking services almost impossible to find in the cannabis business, and they got retail banking services for these card applicants. Insurance, point-of-sale systems free for 2 years to the card licensees. So they've done a lot of work. So we're committed. We thank you for the opportunity to present. We thank you for your support of DASNY and the excellent work our employees do on behalf of New York State.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Appreciate you being here today to speak on this. I want to follow up at a point you made, and I just want to make sure I'm getting my math correct here. So in regard to the Cannabis Social Equity Investment Fund, the state, through the budget process, put in the initial $50 million, right? And then Chicago Atlantic was tasked with going out and raising an additional $150 million.
Yep.
So
the fund, so the Social
fund.
Equity Fund, and their managers, which are Siebert Shank and
Yes.
Member Willis, were charged with raising the private equity. They
Okay.
did that from Chicago Atlantic.
And so in June, as you mentioned, DASNY's former CEO and the governor kind of celebrated that had been completed. And the statement was made, Chicago Atlantic's financial commitment will help open the doors for so many who has faced insurmountable obstacles of accessing capital and economic security, some of the issues that you mentioned in your opening remarks. So to date, how much of the 150 has been allocated been put towards some of the build-outs that you referenced?
So we view the fund as a whole, so it's $150 million.
Okay.
So that you have the state's 50, and you have the 150 in equity. Chicago Atlantic matches the investment for these dispensaries 75%, and the state share is 25%.
I see.
So far, and it's hard to say the 20-some aren't fully complete yet. So far, the state has spent about $25 million, another $5 to $10 million to come shortly to finish out the existing projects. And SCSC has reimbursed 18 to 19 million of that. So that went back into the fund. So that is available to reinvest.
And so that allocation has been used mostly for development and construction, the build-out of these initial cards before the litigation took place.
And for the entire real estate effort. So you have to pay a security deposit. You have to pay first month's rent. You have to buy insurance. So there's closing costs and things like that. So it has been used as the seed money to both establish the fund, to to close on the investment, but primarily for these construction costs.
For the construction. So what about the loan fund that OCM celebrated earlier this year, I think up to $100,000 per card licensee, they would have access for capital loans. And would that be coming out of the same fund as well?
It would.
And have any of those loans been made to this date?
No, the injunction, again, and I don't want to get too far ahead of OCM, prohibits OCM from taking actions on behalf of card, and the fund can only serve card licensees.
Right.
So the monies from this fund can only go to card licensees. They're currently injuncted. DASNY and SCSE and the fund are prepared to move forward as soon as
Understood.
as soon as it's lifted.
Understood. And so, just to clarify, is that by statute or is that by regulation? Whereas the funds can only be used for the card program related?
That's a statutory requirement.
That's a statutory requirement. So even though there are other challenges in the regulatory environment, Senator Hinchey talked about some of the needs with our growers and cultivators, for example, they would not be able to access these social equity funds because they're not being used in furtherance of the card program specifically.
And card and real estate for dispensaries.
Card
So it's
and real
retail
estate.
dispensaries, card retail dispensaries is the limitation.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Questions from the panel? Senator Matera.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me again? Hello?
There you go.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for your testimony. A lot of these dispensaries, you hear about going into industrial parks. Can you explain, in other words, you don't feel that, if that's a good place to have a business? Do you feel that, in other words, that crime is going to escalate because of these areas that they're considering them going to?
I'm not sure who's considering it. I will tell you for the trade areas that, okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The trade areas that the fund and SCSC are considering, really, we need to have a lot of foot traffic, a lot of other types of retail. Industrial zone isn't the typical area that we would look at in order to have a high volume dispensary. We look for more of a retail area.
It's on Long Island, that's what they're looking more in industrial areas than into strip stores, et cetera.
Only 5 towns opted in on Long Island, I believe.
Which I was very, very proud that my Smithtown and Huntington opted out, thank you.
With the 5 towns that opted in, some had fairly aggressive zoning that limit it to light industrial areas. So that precludes a large chunk of Long Island for those towns that have that specific, that's just not an ideal location with, lacks foot traffic, sometimes lacks parking.
Wow.
So we haven't looked at industrial areas, we've looked at retail areas.
And these projects, do we have any kind of language for the trade? Obviously, is this prevailing wage, any of these construction projects? Are there project labor agreements involved? Is there prevailing wage tag to this?
I think it is not a requirement, but I think by and large you pay prevailing wage in New York City and some of those markets. It is not an absolute requirement.
That's not a requirement right now with taxpayers' monies, that this would be prevailing wage?
It
these
is not.
projects?
The projects are very small. A lot of the design build firms do the work themselves. So there may not be a lot of subcontracting work, but it's not a requirement. and the amounts are small. It's around $1 million plus to develop, depending on the dispensary.
So it's exempt, you're saying it's exempt from prevailing wage, it's exempt from project labor agreements?
Correct. Those were not required as part of the enabling statute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Matera. Senator Hinchey.
Thank you very much, and hello. Thank you for being here today. Am I correct that right now the funding that DASNY can give out to card applicants is like a lump sum? There's a large amount of money, or one amount of money, not per need, on each card for the real estate opening.
I wasn't following your question, I'm sorry.
So DASNY can help card licensees open their stores, but how much money are you giving each
So it's not allocated like that. So on the rental program, for example, we'll identify the property, execute a lease. The fund executes a lease with the landlord, and then the fund itself has a sublease with the operator. So it just depends on the location, how much rent there is, the build out, the size of the store, how much work has to be done. Sometimes you get into a location that has to be divided up. It has to, it has greater needs. You may have to do demolition. If it's what they call a clean box, ready to go, it's a little bit cheaper to develop. So it'll
you're
be a
saying
range
right
of
now the
costs.
process is by need for each
For the site,
license?
correct.
Right. Okay, it's our understanding, I think we might hear a little bit more about this later on. It's our understanding that there's a challenge in that process and that's not actually kind of playing out. So we'll get more a little bit later from another panel and we can follow up.
I'd appreciate understanding what the challenges are at a granular level. We know that there's always a challenge when you get into a market and do construction. It's not an easy process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hinchey. Senator Hoylman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to ask about the seeming delays in building stores. I think there was an estimation that we'd have 150 stores by June of this year, and certainly we're not close to that. What accounts for that foot dragging, if you will?
So I wouldn't characterize it as foot dragging, and I will try to explain some of what happened in the market. So there was a lot of enthusiasm and exuberance about the ability to raise equity funding, which is just cash that goes into an account. And the wholesale market had a lot of problems starting in the fall of 2022. There were, the illegal competition was coming up. The injunction happened. So the ability to attract an equity investor, which to start with are pretty limited because you can't be federally chartered, you can't report. There's a whole bunch of issues around who could invest equity in this type of program. So the equity markets, as I understand it, now I came to DASNY December of 22, so a lot of this happened before I got there, but as I understand it, the equity markets pretty much dried up then. The only folks left who were willing to invest equity were the regional organizations, and the ROs are restricted under the TPI restrictions, which, as noted earlier, are foundational to the social equity approach that OCM has taken. So they were not able to invest, and that's when we had to turn to a debt structure, which Chicago Atlantic has a REIT and has a debt fund, and that's how they make their cannabis investments. So you can't build without money, right? And DASNY cannot execute a contract without proof that we have the resources available to execute on it. It's the same whether it's CUNY, Office of Mental Health, any of our dozens of clients out there. You have to have the money. We didn't have the money. Now, the governor had the thoughtfulness and foresight to allow us to use some of the money to build some pop-outs and get them open in the market, pop-ups. You may, I know Senator Kruger was familiar with the pop-up concept. We opened some in her district. But we were able to use some of the money to get some stores open early. But until you have the resources to build, we were just stuck signing leases and not really being able to do a robust build out. And then the first injunction threw a big wrench in that with half the state. And the second injunction, pretty much stopped the real estate identification process altogether. So there were a lot of challenges there. Certainly, we wished we'd been able to open more stores earlier and hit that threshold of 150, but we did not.
So the 50 million that we allocated was not enough to get the...
Oh, not for 150 stores. That was always considered to be the state's share of a larger investment. So 50 of 200 million, 25% of the store. And like I said, we did use some to begin building out stores, but to build out pop-up locations and have them open, in January, I think January of 2023. But there are enough resources to build these dispensaries, and as soon as the injunction's lifted, and we are continuing actually our build out of the existing leases, we're spending on that because we're unfettered from spending on those leases. We just can't move forward with a broader
Final
real
question.
estate.
What's the interest rate that you offer to licensees on their loans that they take out?
They will pay 13% over 10 years. They're non-recourse, unsecured loans.
Seems
There
high.
isn't there's not a product like that available anywhere. That is a highly advantaged product for borrowing.
Thank you, Senator Hoylman Siegel. Senator Fernandez.
The fund is meant for all social equity applicants, not just CURD, correct? Card carriers.
No, the fund, the New York State Social Equity Cannabis Fund is only for card licensees.
Where in the statute is the fund limited to only card applicants? Where does it say that?
I'll defer to counsel.
Well, the statute specifically indicates that it's for use by social equity applicants that are licensed under Article 2. Other licensees are licensed pursuant to Article 4, so we're limited to just those conditional adult use licenses, and it's specifically referenced in the statute that it's for conditional adult use social equity licensees.
So a social equity applicant must apply for the card status?
A conditional.
A conditional one?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll share the citation with you.
Thank you, Senator Fernandez. Senator Rivera. I can see him.
Just have a few questions. So as far as, you told us the reason that ultimately you went with Chicago Atlantic, you said it was partly because there was nobody else that was willing to, that they had a particular structure that was, that made it possible for them to enter into this. Would that be correct?
It is a debt structure. It's not the only reason, but they're the ones that came to the table.
So are you aware, and I'm sure that you are,
they're a lender to the fund. The fund has privity with the card licensee or has the contract with a licensee. Chicago Atlantic does not.
so according, this is, I'm quoting some published reports, and I'm not, besides not being personally aware, but I'm certainly the reports say that. You don't think it's problematic? It seems to, explain to me how it's not a conflict, that they are a fund that both owns 10% of a firm that, as we were talking earlier, there are legitimate concerns about some of these vertically integrated firms being able to have more space to be able to be financially successful, while some of the folks that we're talking about that we want to be helpful to, the card folks, don't have the ability to, don't have the money, et cetera. This is not, you don't think it's a conflict there?
I don't think it's a conflict because they are a lender to the fund. They are not an investor in these individual licensees, and they are a lender to the fund.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll wrap with just a clarifying question. Mr. Williams, you talked about maybe $1 million rough estimate would be the cost of a build out of a store. I'm assuming that's mostly in the New York City area. For card dispensaries outside of greater New York City, in Rochester, where I represent, or other upstate communities, I would assume that cost would be considerably less.
I would think so, yes.
Is there like a as you're working with the cards who are eligible to work with you, not enjoined by the lawsuit. Is there a number that you're kind of sharing with them so that they can prepare based on the term loan that Senator Hoylman Siegel talked about?
They get, we do an initial assessment and share an estimate of costs, and I would
It's
expect
project
them.
by project?
Correct.
I see, okay.
So once they are matched and we go forward with the process of identifying what does the licensee want for branding, what do they want for finishes, and we show them the design of the facility, because we've rented it and done some design work, some rudimentary design work, and we go through that with them. And then they are given the assessment cost, which is a rough rule of estimate. You haven't gotten in and really gotten into the nuts and bolts of construction yet. But we would anticipate, they could be anywhere from, some people have spent millions of dollars on dispensaries in other states, but I would expect upstate to be well under $1 million, and New York City to be in $1 million or in excess of $1 million, and some are as high as 1.3, 1.5 million plus design costs. So they can be expensive depending on the real estate.
I know that DASNY is an integral partner with OCM in making sure that retail cannabis actually gets off the ground. What type of communication, resource sharing, what have you, does DASNY have with OCM to ensure kind of a smooth transition? I know that the former CEO is no longer part of the CCB, for example, but just kind of in his change, how are we ensuring communication between both state agencies?
I would say since DASNY was authorized to really have this investment in the fund, the communication's been constant with OCM through that whole real estate development process, through the licensing process. DASNY, for example, developed a tool for card licensees so they can go on and see, is my address proximate? So we do that in conjunction with OCM, but the calls and the meetings and the discussions are daily.
Good, glad to hear it. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Thank you very much for being here from DASNY. Oh, yes. Of course, Senator Rivera.
Again, it's wonderful to have these going out to the intertubes, because then folks see it and then they go, wait, there's actually somebody who represents a borrower who can attest that in conversations, Chicago Atlantic is negotiating directly with them. So it's not just about, I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but there might be some folks that are testifying later that can attest to it directly. But the reason why I brought it up is because we have heard as much, that it's not just them lending money, that it's them, representatives from Chicago Atlantic directly talking to borrowers and negotiating directly with them. Were you aware that such things were happening?
Well, the business terms are set, so I'm not sure. I would imagine that an individual card licensee might have a discussion with the fund or with Chicago Atlantic. They're certainly not precluded from that, but the business terms are set, so there wouldn't be like additional business terms. If there are, I'd be interested to know that, because that's not my understanding of the process.
And I do think that there's some folks that are going to testify later that can attest to that. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Senator Rivera. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for being here. Thank you both for being here representing DASNY. We'll now move to the next panel, which is the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, Acting Commissioner Amanda Hiller, and General Counsel.
I'm well, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Doing
Ready?
great.
I haven't run into you in the hallways lately, so.
Well, that's how it works, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Just stuck in the office, but when I walk out, I still do see your car there.
We'll continue and welcome Acting Commissioner Amanda Hiller. Thank you for being here representing the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. Commissioner, we'll give you 3 minutes for some opening remarks. We appreciate you have your written testimony here. We have that here at our desk, and then we'll go into some questions.
Wonderful. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Hiller, General Counsel and Acting Commissioner of the Department of Taxation and Finance. I welcome this opportunity to discuss the work of the Tax Department with regard to adult use cannabis. As is true for over 40 other state and local taxes, the Tax Department administers the taxes on adult use cannabis. We register the taxpayers who must pay adult use cannabis taxes, process their tax filings, and collect and distribute the tax revenue. There are two different types of adult use cannabis taxes: the taxes paid by retailers and the taxes paid by distributors. Adult use cannabis retailers must pay state and local taxes on the adult use cannabis products they sell to their retail customers. These taxes, like sales taxes, are based on the retail sales price of the product. We distribute the local taxes to counties, who are permitted to retain a portion and must distribute the balance to the localities where licensed dispensaries are operating. Adult use cannabis distributors must pay a separate tax on the products they sell to adult use cannabis retailers. Pursuant to the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, or MRTA, this tax is imposed at various rates based on the type and potency of various adult use cannabis products. Sometimes the grower or processor sells directly to retailers, in which case they are responsible for paying the distributor tax. To date, the Tax Department has registered 26 adult use cannabis retailers and 124 adult use cannabis distributors. We have collected $8.6 million in retail taxes, including $2.6 million in local taxes. We have also collected $4.3 million in distributor taxes. The Tax Department now also has the responsibility to enforce these cannabis taxes. As most of you know, when the MRTA was enacted in 2021, the enforcement of the new adult use cannabis tax law was vested in the Office of Cannabis Management. The Tax Department was assigned administrative responsibilities, but not enforcement authority. That changed this past May when the 2023-24 state budget included new cannabis enforcement laws that are modeled on our tobacco tax laws. The Tax Department now has the authority and responsibility to enforce the state's adult use cannabis taxes, including the authority to inspect businesses selling cannabis to ensure tax compliance, and the authority to seize illicit cannabis we find. The tax law now includes a number of civil penalties that increase substantially for repeat offenders, and the state's tax evasion criminal statutes now treat evasion of cannabis taxes like evasion of other taxes. The distributor level tax is the key to this enforcement authority. This tax must be paid on every adult use cannabis product when it is transferred to a retailer. So any retailer holding product for which this tax was not paid has already violated the tax law, and all that illicit cannabis can then be seized. Tax Department criminal investigators, together with investigators from the Office of Cannabis Management, began conducting regulatory inspections of retail cannabis locations in early June. To date, we have conducted 275 inspections of 202 unique locations. We have seized over 4.5 tons of illicit cannabis. I'm incredibly proud of the work Team Tax has been doing around cannabis enforcement, and we're just getting started. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to take questions.
Commissioner Hiller, and thank you for keeping to that 3 minutes. I appreciate it. Talk to me a little bit about the relationship that did change between OCM as it relates to enforcement after this past session, where you were taking on DTF was taking on a greater responsibility in that role. How is the communication between OCM and DTF in the sense that, is there a process in place where an OCM enforcement action it gets announced or gets decided upon, and then that triggers DTF's engagement? It seemed to me during our earlier time with OCM, the enforcement operation just seemed clunky. Everyone's working hard, everyone understands that there's a problem, but it just seems that there were maybe too many chefs in the kitchen, if you will. So could you kind of talk about how the process works in terms of collaborating and communicating with OCM?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that we have an incredibly effective partnership with the Office of Cannabis Management. We go out with Office of Cannabis Management investigators together when we're doing retail inspections, because OCM and tax have different inspection responsibilities with regard to a store. So we go in together, we plan those operations together, We pre-meet in advance of any particular inspection together. We are in the store together. The process then diverges on the other side. We are the ones taking custody of the cannabis that's being seized, and our folks are the ones that are doing the incredibly intensive, detailed work to catalog all of that product. The Office of Cannabis Management is doing other things on the other side of that enforcement around the licensure of that store, around engaging with their other partners around whether or not to seek a closure order, for example. I think it's important to remember that tax only closes a business to collect a tax debt. Right. We don't close businesses in the ordinary course of our operation. So unless there's a substantial unpaid tax debt, we're not going to be the ones padlocking a store. But we are the ones that are cataloging all of that evidence that's then being used by OCM in their administrative proceedings, that are used by tax in our administrative proceedings, and that might ultimately be used in a criminal proceeding. So I think that that detailed work that we're doing is an incredibly important part of the role, and that's a part where we diverge. But otherwise, we are working in lockstep with OCM on that investigatory authority.
And do you have enough resources within your existing DTF criminal investigations unit to partner with them as they seek to expand their enforcement operations over the next few months and beyond? Can DTF, under its existing resources, meet that demand?
We received some additional resources as part of the last budget cycle, and we're using that to add staff. Unlike OCM, we have the benefit of having a long-standing, experienced criminal investigative division with a couple of hundred people in it who've been doing tax enforcement forever. And we have been working closely with OCM investigators in part because they were new to this space. And so we were able to sort of help in the development of procedures around investigations, around evidence collection, around some of the logistics of these investigations. And I think that that's also been a really effective partnership. Certainly, there's always more to be done around tax evasion. We not only are now charged with enforcing the cannabis tax laws, we also enforce the tobacco tax laws, and I would say that these are Sisyphean endeavors. There are a lot of economic incentives to violate the tax law, whether for tobacco or for cannabis, and so yeah, we could always use more resources, but there's also, it's important to remember that there's a lag time around that. We get some resources, we can go through the process to begin onboarding new investigators. Those investigators will be peace officers. They need to undergo particularized training, and then they're going to still be kind of inexperienced. And so we're going to put them on teams with experienced investigators as they build up, and they aren't going to be working independently for quite some time.
Thank you, Commissioner. As you talked about the seizure of the product itself being under DTF's responsibility, can you comment at all, and I may be using the wrong terminology here, so excuse me if I'm not making sense, but kind of
street value of the product is. One of the things that's an important component of the civil penalty structure that we have is that not based on the potency of the product, for example. The taxes are still measured under the same measures that as anybody else is paying for the distributor taxes based on potency for the various types of product. And that's important as we look to perhaps leveraging the tax evasion statutes that we have in place for cannabis tax evasion. We aren't there yet. I think certainly, my sense is that the MRTA was always intended to look for civil enforcement in the first instance. We still have criminal laws on the books, but there isn't an appetite to pursue them. So we imagine that when we think it's time to try to bring the first cannabis tax evasion case, that will have to be an exceptional case, and that we will have to work very closely with the prosecutor's office around trying to put that case forward. In the meantime, we're looking at civil case penalties, and those civil penalties for us are really just based on the weight of the product.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Senator Krueger.
Thank you, Amanda. I sort of laughed at your being the acting commissioner, because I think you've been acting longer than I've been acting as a senator.
Spinners.
Oh, okay, you've just been there forever.
I've been at tax since 2012. I've been the general counsel since 2012, and so, you know, I'm my own counsel here
All
today.
right,
Which is a little,
confusing.
yes, I'm very proud. We have a great team at tax, and I'm very proud to be the face of that team.
Thank you. Okay, so we're very glad that you're now involved using your authority as tax and finance to go after these illegal shops and the illegal product. That's why we built it into legislation, to give you that authority. And I see in your testimony, you talked about 275 inspections, 202 unique locations, 4.5 tons of illicit cannabis. How many fines have you given out?
We haven't yet.
You have not?
We have not yet. We have been working through a subpoena process to identify the actual specific actors that are the leaseholders of those stores. So we have been going through it. It turns out that that's a very difficult process to establish exactly who we can hold responsible for those fines as a civil matter. So we're, like, for example, we're subpoenaing landlords for the leases for those properties in order to establish who should do that. I will say that I think that the most notable civil penalty we're imposing right now is the seizure of product. Because every time we seize that product, we take that out of a store, and that's a cost of doing business for those shop owners. And we're going back for repeat inspections, not only because the penalties increase substantially for repeat offenses under the new civil authority we have, but because that also adds to the volume for the cost of doing business for folks. Our experience at tax is that often civil penalties don't get paid until there's a criminal charge pending. And so there will always be a collectability issue on the other side of that. And so finding other ways to put dents in these businesses, like clearing their store every couple of weeks, is a significant penalty for businesses.
And you were here earlier when we were asking very many parallel questions of OCM. You know, I'm of the belief that taking the product but still letting the stores continue to operate 2 days later isn't really effective.
I get that.
I want to padlock the stores. So just on a sidebar, is part of the problem with trying to tracking who to hold responsible, this other issue in New York State, which we're hoping the governor will sign the bill we passed, that everybody's creating these illegal stores under LLCs, which may not be illegal by definition, but are illegal in the fact that they are doing illegal business. So do you think that having the transparency law signed into law will actually give you another tool to find the players in these businesses?
You know, I don't know that one way or the other, because we don't know who's on the other side of a lot of these businesses. So, you know, if it turns out that there's an LLC, I'm a lawyer, I would probably form an LLC, and I'd probably then form another LLC, and then form another one after that in order to create a layer of entity. I understand that process. Certainly transparency around LLC ownership might provide some greater insight into that, but that doesn't mean we can actually necessarily even find those individuals. It's finding them that always matters. So, you know, I don't know whether that'll make a difference or not.
And we've heard from both OCM and, without asking you directly, you know, that resources for doing these investigations and tracking these down are relatively finite. Do you see a role for NYPD and their 33,000 members in assisting you in the inspections, the closing, the pulling out? I mean, you've done tobacco forever, so to speak.
Sure.
So do you use NYPD in some correlated way when you're going after illegal tobacco sales without tax stamps? Excuse me.
I mean, we do sometimes, but I want to be very careful here. You know, for the most part, the new authority that is a civil enforcement authority, and that civil enforcement authority includes the authority to do regulatory inspections. Regulatory inspections are a particular carve-out from our general warranted search structure, where an industry is heavily regulated. An administrative agency that oversees that regulated industry. For certain industries that now include cannabis, has included tobacco, and also includes junkyards. I mean, there's a range of odd industries. that authority, essentially the deal is that the industry is sufficiently tightly regulated that people who are engaged in that industry, whether they're doing it legally or illegally, are on notice that there is a regulatory scheme in place that they must comply with. And then we can go in and search that store without a warrant because they are holding themselves out to be engaged in that business. Again, whether they're licensed or unlicensed, if they're holding engaged in that business, we can go in without a warrant to make sure that they're complying with our civil regulatory structure. And if they're not, we can impose civil fines. As soon as you bring the NYPD in, we're not engaged in a regulatory civil search. We're now engaged in a criminal search. We need a warrant. There's a whole other set of structures that need to
NYPD
apply.
works on civil issues as well as criminal in some categories, and you write in your testimony you have criminal authority now under tax evasion.
We do actually have criminal authority. And so, for example, we do regulatory inspections for tobacco. We'll go into a bodega. We will search that bodega. They may be selling properly taxed cigarettes. They may also be selling untaxed cigarettes. They might also be selling untaxed cannabis, in which case we'll seize that product. But we go in because it's holding itself out to be in the business of, and when we go there, we're not bringing the NYPD in with us. Instead, we are partnering with the NYPD or prosecutor's office in our wiretap operations to identify counterfeit stamps, for example. And those partnerships are a different part of the process.
I guess I'll just ask you, my time's up, to think about how we can use more people in law enforcement to help us be creative and go after the owners of these stores so we can get these stores closed down.
Oh, absolutely. I will say that I think at some point we are going to have to revisit our willingness to consider criminal penalties for flagrant violators of our cannabis laws. I mean, we have a tax evasion statute, and when we find the right case for that, we will work with the prosecutor's office to bring that case. But for the most part, I don't see an appetite for criminal enforcement of some of these laws. But we're talking about people and businesses that are flagrantly violating our laws. And we just don't have that willingness yet until we've really tested our civil process. We've had it since May. We started in June. We're, getting up and running was a thing. Yep. We're just getting started. I think we're going to know better this time next year whether we're really making a dent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Hoylman Siegel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Regarding limited liability companies, and thank you for the question, Senator Kruger. In our legislation that is before the governor for her signature, the natural owner has to be listed. So you cannot have an LLC owned by an LLC to qualify under our LLC Transparency Act.
I recognize that. I also know a lot of lawyers. They will find
So do I.
They will find a way.
Which is why we wrote it that way. Next question.
No, and I totally understand and respect that, but I think one of the challenges that we see in tax is that in the course of one tax year, we will see multiple organizational changes.
Let me ask you, speaking of multiples, it seems that many of these shops they look like McDonald's franchises. Do you have a suspicion that there's a common element, common ownership among them?
I don't feel like I can speak to that. It might be that our criminal investigators have that suspicion, but they haven't shared that with me.
And in terms of the fines that you're levying, you describe it as you said, cost of doing business. That's exactly the problem I think that many of my colleagues see, that these fines really have no teeth if they just build it into their business operations, right?
Well, I think the current fine structure that we have now that was enacted this past May represented a massive increase in the fine structure as compared to the MRTA that was originally enacted. And we're still early in this process. Both we and OCM are early in this process. And so, as I said, I think we'll see a year from now where that is.
But part of the problem is one of the civil remedies you suggest, which is seizing the, the tons
Sure.
of cannabis, and you say you can go back every week, there just isn't there aren't the resources to do that. So there are so many that have been shut in our respective districts.
Absolutely.
Products seized. We'll be lucky if we see you guys in 6 months, based on the amount of resources that you have to pursue these bad actors.
No, and I think that's absolutely fair. I think there are just pragmatic constraints on our ability to be out on the streets. I think we are working hard to make sure that our enforcement efforts are coordinated and targeted, that we're working in particular to try to support new retail dispensaries by looking at the kinds of businesses that are in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But those aren't, certainly our inspections are not limited to that.
Final question. Thank you. Thank you so much, Acting Commissioner. I really appreciate it. Final question, which is, you've collected taxes valued $8.6 million in retail taxes, including $2.6 million in local taxes, $4.3 million in distributor taxes. Any ballpark dispensaries?
The current structure that exists, the current tax structure. And as I understand it, it is, so by statute, we set one up that has to do with potency.
Yep.
And so, and as I understand, the tax structure that exists for alcohol is different.
Yep.
And so, could you tell me the differences between the two, and then whether you have an opinion on whether we should, I've heard from some folks that we should actually switch from the current tax structure of potency to one that deals with something similar as we do with alcohol.
You know,
I want to see your opinion on that.
One, the existing potency tax structure was part of the MRTA as originally enacted, and as some of you might recall, certainly as that legislation was getting nailed down, tax wasn't at the table, so we weren't part of the decision making around the specific granular nature of that tax.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
I remember him well.
We can all sort of come back to think about that. But I think that the intention behind the potency tax was to create some scale for products that have essentially a different efficacy and then likely a different street value. But have that measured before we got to a place where there's a retail price that we could attach to the product. And so I think the intention was to try to calibrate the taxes between different kinds of products. We're talking about,
But regardless, since our time is limited, regardless of the original intent, I guess what I'm asking is, do you believe, there's some folks that have posited to me that we need to move away from this current structure and perhaps consider one that is similar to the one that we use for alcohol. So I wanted to see if I can get your opinion on that, if you have one.
Well, I think the thing that's most important about the current tax structure that we have on cannabis, which is akin to the structure that we have on tobacco, is that there is a tax that was already due and had to be paid by the time the product arrived on the shelf of a retailer. And it's that tax that makes the product in that illegal store illegal product. And I think that that is an important structure, because we don't want to be penalizing customers who bought those products in the store. We want to penalize the retailer that has a store full of illegal product. But the product is illegal because there was a tax that was due when it arrived at the retailer. The challenge, I think, is identifying a measure for that tax. The MRTA included a potency-based measure for that tax, and I understand that a lot of people in the distributive chain have had challenges around that tax. But it's a tax that doesn't depend on the retail sale price of the product, because we don't have a retail sales price of the product yet. We could measure based on the sale price from the distributor to the retailer, but that only is effective if there isn't an integrated retail chain. So where we allow an integrated retail chain, now that's a price that can be manipulated, and that's a tax that can be manipulated. So I think the challenge is in identifying a surrogate to the potency tax, but if we eliminate the tax at that level, then we essentially hamstring enforcement of the tax structure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rivera. Senator Ryan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are any of the illicit shops paying taxes?
I don't know. I don't think that they're paying cannabis taxes. But there are stores that I think are in the business of just being a weed store. They have a neon sign that says, "I'm a weed store." But there are also tons of businesses out across New York where we suspect that illicit cannabis is being sold alongside legal products, and that might include properly taxed tobacco products. It might include other stuff.
Just weed store example.
Yeah. In the weed store, they're not paying taxes to us. Our return processing structure would flag that they were trying to make a payment to us that didn't include a return that was connected to a registration. So we're not getting those taxes from a store that is exclusively a weed store. But even that weed store is likely to also need a certificate of authority for sales tax if they're selling paraphernalia.
So according to a former panelist, there's conservatively over 1,000 illicit weed stores, and there's not nearly as many legal weed stores. So assuming that the illicit stores might charge lower prices because they're not paying taxes. How are we ever going to balance out this ratio of why would anyone go to a legal weed store if it's more expensive than this store up the street that looks just the same? Like, how are we ever going to get rid of the black market if we're not bringing, hundreds of enforcement actions per quarter?
I suspect that that's a combination of different strategies. One is certainly enforcement, having boots on the ground, going into stores, seizing the products that's there, and undertaking that civil enforcement structure. I think certainly on the other side is having more legal stores. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was telling me, who was operating one of the showcases, and was telling me that she knew 2 farmers who had grown a cannabis crop that didn't qualify because there was mold in the crop. I appreciate knowing that the products that are coming through a retail store are safe, are regulated, and it's the part of the challenge is that there are 5 illegal weed stores and there's 1 legal weed store.
I
And
think
the legal meat
we'd
store.
be more comfortable if that ratio was correct.
Right, well,
It's more
yeah.
like there's hundreds of illegal.
Right, but let's say on my, in my little neighborhood, when I lived in the city, my neighborhood was like three, I lived in my few blocks, and there might be a retail store, there are gonna be some other non-retail. Having more retail outlets helps balance that. And I think that OCM is working hard to bring new retailers online, and that will provide a balance. I think we were hearing about alcohol. A lot of the OCM structure is based on the way the state has historically regulated alcohol. I'm going to guess that in the early days of post-prohibition, there were a ton of illegal outlets and there were no legal outlets. But we were able to bring new legal outlets on. Those illegal outlets ultimately got squeezed out, and that's not where our problem is anymore. And we do, certainly the tax department undertakes alcohol enforcement for people who are smuggling untaxed alcohol into New York, but we don't enforce in bars for alcohol. SLA does that. OCM will do that. Right now we're in this critical point where the licensed shops are just rolling out, and the illegal shops have had an opportunity to have a bit of a foothold. But as we continue enforcement against the illegal shops and roll out new legal shops, I think we're going to see that balance shift.
In terms of a strategy for the enforcement actions, do you have a goal of how many enforcement actions you would like to bring per quarter?
We're trying to bring as many, we're trying to undertake as many inspections as we can do. We're targeting, one of the things that's important to remember is that, if we're going into a small store, we need a small team. It takes a couple of hours to catalog the product that's in that store and bag it and take it out. If we're going into a large store with a huge inventory, now we've got a dozen people in that store, and it's going to take several hours for us to work through that site. So we want to be targeting large stores. We can do more small stores, but it's also always part of keeping that balance.
Do you need more resources?
Well, you always need more resources, but I think we're.
I hope when the budget rolls around, you ask for an appropriate amount of resources to be able to conduct the activities.
Right, I think that, as I started out earlier, one of the challenges is that even if we had, money for additional enforcement personnel, we're not going to have them out on the street tomorrow or next month. I mean, it takes such a long time.
I don't perceive this problem going away tomorrow or next
Sure,
month.
and so, having the ability to build out that enforcement team will be important. At the same time, at tax, we are very sensitive to the challenges that are associated with bringing in tax revenue, and so we also try to be really, really responsible stewards of that tax revenue in our agency.
I appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you, Senator Ryan. Senator Skoufis.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your testimony today. Some of the Q&A, so I hope this isn't redundant. However, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the potency tax. That's, I don't think something, I did miss that. Then I won't bore everyone else and be redundant. I'll go back to the videotape.
Go for it.
Okay. Is there any other comparable tax on any other type of product in New York State where there's a sliding scale of a tax depending on the strength of the product? I know for alcohol, there are some thresholds. If you're below the threshold, there's no excise tax. If you're above the threshold, there is an excise tax. But is there any other product with a sliding scale based on strength?
I don't think that the tax itself, I'm not immediately thinking of any other tax where the tax is done based on the potency of the product. But I will say that, most of our transaction taxes scale up based on the cost of the product in the marketplace. And so you pay more sales tax on an expensive product than you do on a cheap product. And you pay more in fuel taxes on 10 gallons of fuel than you do on 1 gallon of fuel.
But if I may,
I think that the intention behind the potency tax, when it was enacted, was to try to base the tax not on the size of the brownie, but on the cannabis in the brownie. Or not the size of the gummy, but the amount of cannabis in the gummy. And that turns out to be a very logistically challenging tax,
But I don't think it was unreasonable at the time to think, you know, is it a plate full of brownies with a milligram of THC, or is it one tiny little brownie with a milligram of THC? We're taxing the THC, not taxing the brownie. And as I said, I understand that that's an incredibly logistically challenging tax, although the tax is, by the way, based on the product labeling. So I think that comes back to how products are developed and labeled to get to how that tax is calculated and paid.
I appreciate that, and I do think that likely was the intention, what you just described. I don't know that there is a comparison to, you buy more fuel and you're taxed more on that fuel. It'd be, I think the comparison there, for example, is there's a different tax rate depending on whether you're getting regular unleaded versus premium versus super premium. There is no different rate, it's the same rate of
But that actually might be a really good surrogate, because I think that the difference, you know, I mean, the price difference, we're talking about a distributor tax, we're not talking about a retail tax, so we don't have a retail price at that point yet. So at the distributor level, we're talking about a tax on a product that may not have had a series of transactions before it got to the retailer. It might be that the grower is selling directly to the retailer. There isn't, at that point in the process to determine what the distributor tax is, I think that there's a challenge in trying to measure what we're trying to tax. And I think the original intention was that we wanted to tax THC. And taxing THC that comes in myriad forms is a challenge. And so the folks that were putting together that initial tax structure tried to create a THC tax across different types of products. Turns out that's really hard, but it's not immediately obvious to me what the appropriate surrogate for that is. What is clear to me is that we continue to need a tax at the distributor level in order to ensure that we have the tools to enforce in illegal shops.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not here to suggest that X or Y be an appropriate replacement, but, and yes, logistically, it's a little bit more complicated than your typical tax, regardless of whether it's at distribution or at retail. However, the tax also, can't be financially prohibitive. And I think that's what a lot of that tier of the system is looking at right now, whereby on a high potency bag of edibles, package of edibles, you're looking at potentially $30 in just this tax before any other costs to distribute the product, before you get to profit margin. And that's as a layperson, that seems untenable to me, especially when you have a black market, to revisit that tax.
Yeah, again, one of the great things about my job is that we administer the taxes that you impose, including the potency tax. For us, what matters is that there be a tax at that level, and that tax be a tax that is objectively measurable, so that we can use that tax as a vehicle for enforcement of illegal cannabis products.
Could you comment on the difference between the retail and the wholesale tax amount? In your opening comments, you said you've collected $8.6 million in retail taxes, and about $4.3 million in distributor taxes, wholesale taxes. Why is there a difference? I'm surprised it's almost 2 to 1.
Well, I think that speaks to the same questions that Senator Skoufis and Senator Rivera had about the potency tax.
Okay,
the retail tax is based on the sales price that the retailer sold the product to a consumer. And we impose 2 different taxes, a 9% state tax and a 4% local tax on that retail sale. So 13% of the retail sales are coming back to the state in taxes. The distributor tax is again based on potency. I think it's ½ cent per milligram of flour, and maybe it's something like 0.8 of a cent per milligram of THC in in concentrated products. I mean, there are 3 different taxes on different types of adult use cannabis products that are all, again, intended to measure the amount of THC in the product or be a surrogate for the amount of THC in the product. And those taxes are the ones that are being paid by distributors. And so the distributor tax is being measured on a different base than the retail taxes, and I think that's what's accounting for the difference. I think I've also heard that some distributors have said that they're having trouble paying the taxes
Right.
On the products that they have sold. We have, the registered taxpayers, whether a distributor registered for the distributor tax or the retail tax, they file tax returns and they remit taxes just like everybody else. There are penalties for failing to file that are different from penalties for failing to pay. And so, as with everybody and every other tax, we encourage people to file even if they can't pay. And then we'll work through the pay process on the other side, but the filing is the first act. And so I suspect that there may also be some unremitted tax on the distributor side.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Appreciate your time, appreciate you being
Absolutely.
here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move to our fifth panel. The Honorable Gail Brewer will be speaking to us via live stream, so we'll need about 2 or 3 minutes just to move the TVs, but we will stay right here. Councilwoman, can you hear us?
I can, thank you very much.
Look at that technology. Well, welcome, Councilwoman Gail Brewer, New York City Councilmember District 6. I'm not sure if you can see us, but okay, you can. Excellent. So we'll be on our best behavior. But we welcome you. Thank you for joining us via Zoom, Skype, whatever we're using. We'll start with you to give some opening comments and remarks. We do have your written remarks in front of us, council member, so thank you for that, and then we'll do a round of questions.
Thank you very much. I will summarize. I am Gail Brewer, and I do represent the west side of Manhattan, and I'm also chair of the City Council Committee on Oversight and Investigations, and I want to thank all of the chairs for giving me this opportunity. I've been listening to your excellent hearing. Last December, our mayor announced a cannabis interagency task force to crack down on unlicensed cannabis stores. And of course, it includes the sheriff and the police department and consumer department and OCM. I can't say it's been very helpful. And that came 4 days after the Upper Weed Side, that's what it was called, was featured in the Daily News. And that was based on our survey by interns, where we had 61 smoke shops, 26 of which were selling weed. And guess what? Now I have 65 such shops selling cannabis, edibles, and vapes. There was no attention from law enforcement. And I think we heard earlier from Senator Harleman Siegel talk about the robberies. So I would say Chief of Patrol John Shell said at a hearing I had last January that there were 593 robberies in 2022, and that's a 137 increase over the prior year. We know that there was a 6-month delay between the two governors and, and signing the MRTA law. And during that time, that's when some of these challenges popped up. I went out with Miranda, the sheriff, and as he said at my January oversight hearing, there are 1,400 unlicensed retailers citywide. Some have higher numbers. But going out with the sheriff was very instructive. We confiscated thousands of products from 3 stores, including one right across the street from my district office on 87th and Columbus. And I watched as OCM and deputies removed everything, even from a trap door. But guess what? 2 days later, that same shop was restocked and is open today. I know because I see it every day from my district office. Interestingly, as you can imagine, there was cash paid and debit card receipts. No credit cards because, it's not supposed to be federally sanctioned. So 1 year has passed since my survey. A July 25th letter from Deputy Mayor Banks to my committee staff stated that citywide just 5 stores have closed, 9 have vacated the premises, one that was on City Hall property, that was interesting, or entered into agreements to stop selling. And 33 had nuisance abatement cases brought against them by the Corporation Council. We don't have a complete list. We've been asking for it. The DA of Manhattan sent hundreds of letters to illicit cannabis retailers and their landlords threatening legal action under the public nuisance law. Some stopped operating, and some landlords commenced eviction proceedings. But it's a very arduous process, as you heard from others. The DA needs evidence from the sheriff, the police department, OCM to bring the cases, and has not received cooperation, I have to be honest, in this endeavor. One letter went to the landlord of Exotics Town Convenience. This was a store mentioned again by Senator Hoylman Siegel. And the agency, DCWP, which is the consumer agency, visited the store, wrote 2 violations, one for not having a non-food retail license and one for lacking an electronic cigarette dealer license. But an OCM raided the store, put a big illicit cannabis seized sticker, and guess what? The sticker was removed and the store is back operating. So what really bothers me are students that are vaping on the halls and in classroom, and it's happening. Liquor stores could never locate within 500 feet of a school, but illegal smoke shops they're right there. They're right next to the campuses. NYPD claims they are unable to police them because only OCM can enforce the MRTA. But what's happening is really, really upsetting to me, and one principal was crying on the phone. The City Council passed Local Law 107, sponsored by Councilmember Schulman, and it holds commercial landlords accountable for their tenants' illegal sale of cannabis. So it sounds great on the paper. But guess what? First violations trigger written warnings and subsequent offenses in fines from $5,000 to $10,000. But we don't know how many landlords have been fined because we don't have the time frame yet for the information. But critics say the fines are too low. So when Mayor Adams announced the Interagency Enforcement Task Force, he said, we're going to go after this. We're going to take care of the whole problem. But guess what? Confiscation is not working. We have some ideas. Possession of more than 5 pounds of cannabis is a felony. Sale of more than 16 ounces is a felony. Sale to a minor is a felony. That's really happening. Provisions of the code allow the agents to shutter unlicensed cannabis stores, particularly Article 81 and Article 3. The sheriff said in a joint operation that the health department clearly had more significant authority about closing down some of these locations, but they're not doing it. Number 3, recent amendments to the MRTA intended to bolster enforcement have no discernible impact. You heard about this earlier. And I have great respect for Chris Alexander, but OCM can change that by allowing the city's DAs to bring so-called 16A cases against unlicensed retailers. Those cases would allow authorities to obtain temporary and permanent injunctions against these illegal operators and levy fines. Only the AG has authority to bring these cases, but the MRTA allows OCM to delegate authority to local prosecutors. Number 4, I am eager to see these licensed dispensaries open in my district, the legal ones. But there's much confusion among applicants and the community boards on the process, and I think that needs to be cleared up. Number 5, Adams, our mayor, should revive the enforcement task force and add the health department and the district attorneys as members. All government stakeholders should meet in one room regularly to share information and devise a cooperative strategy to shutter stores methodically. Their books have the laws. They need to start today. And I want to add another issue is oath. That's where the fines are adjudicated. So we called oath. Guess what oath said? They have no way of knowing who has paid and who has not. I would have to go to each agency and each store to find out. I'm frustrated. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Council Member. We appreciate your boots on the ground report, and we know that you've probably been walking the streets, literally stopping into these stores and looking with your own eyes. I'm curious to know, from a constituent engagement piece, everyone knows that you're very accessible, Council Member. You're hearing from parents, you're hearing from other business owners, you're hearing from community board members. When it comes to enforcement, if you could make a theme up, like what are you hearing the most? What's the most common theme from enforcement from these different constituency types?
I am hearing that the coordination is not there. If you're going to have a shutdown, a padlock, you have to have shared information. The information with all these different stakeholders that I have mentioned and that you're mentioning is not happening. And that's where the problem is. If they were to share information, then I think we would have a chance at padlocking.
Information as a member of City Council directly from
Purchasing, no, you have to purchase 3 times. If you're going to purchase as a sheriff, as PD, as the finance department, then you have to share that with the DA, share that with the OCM. We all need to be in a room to figure out exactly what's needed to be able to close down these shops. The information is not being shared, and so the public has no idea why they're open. How in the world, Gail, can you have 65 shops that are mostly illegal in one location? They don't, it's a mystery. And we have to find a way to padlock them. So the answer to your question is everybody's frustrated, but nobody knows why this exists.
One of your proposed solutions, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, was that under the 16A authority that you referenced, that part of that could be delegated from OCM to the District Attorney of New York. And is that something that you've had conversations about already with District Attorney Bragg or with OCM? Yes?
Yes, we have had it. It's not happening yet. It does need to happen, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Senator Hoylman Siegel.
Hello, Gail. Good to see you. As Gail knows, I also represent part of the Upper West Side. And just wanted to thank you first for really being so persistent, which is what's required when you have multiple bureaucracies pointing fingers at each other, foot dragging, confusion on the ground, lack of resources, lack of resolve. And different administrations claiming that they do or they do not have the authority. In terms of the interagency work that's going on in City Hall, have they come up with any proposals thus far, or Are these proposals that you have spelled out for us from your office?
These are proposals from my office. I don't even know if they meet, and if they do meet, they don't share anything. And they don't have everybody on the list that they should. You gotta include the district attorney, you have to include the health department, and they're not on the list as part of that task force. So I'm saying that task force has to meet on a regular basis with perhaps even more, obviously including tax and finance perhaps on the state level, everybody in the room to come up with, as we heard earlier, some kind of a coordinated padlock program, in my opinion.
And then, and I completely agree with you on that front. And then in terms of the sense of urgency, I can hear it in your voice. Is that based on your concern that young kids, tourists, or unknowing consumers are going to ingest something that may not be safe for them?
Well, yes, obviously we're worried about the safety. We know that all of that cannabis comes from California because you see CI on every box when I have been with the sheriff and seen the bus. But the other issue is some of these cannabis smoke shops are open at 7 a.m. right near a school. I wonder what that's for. And they're within the 500 feet. And I worry about the lack of educational attainment if you're high in the school. So it's not just being sick from the product, but you should not be vaping in the school. It's too easy to purchase.
Thank you, council member.
Hoylman Siegel, recognize Senator Kruger.
Well, thank you, Gail. I think probably Brad Hoylman Siegel, Liz Kruger, and Gail Brewer have worked together for, I don't know, a total of our entire ages. So it's like 100 years, maybe more for us. And I just want to tell you, Gail, you are spot.
Put me in, it's really old. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But you were really spot on what we can be doing and need to be doing. And I think you heard from the earlier conversations that I think everyone is pretty much in agreement. We actually think we have the tools, civil and criminal, and we have a lot of agencies, none perhaps with enough resources, but the fact that you highlighted the felonies that exist under law now, I get the legislature doesn't want to pass more felonies, and we don't want to increase criminalization of the use of marijuana. That was the entire purpose of MRTA, not to do that. But as you point out, certain of these activities are absolutely already illegal and felonies, and we should be coordinating between NYPD, the sheriffs, OCM, tax and finance. I guess, Attorney General is not testifying today, but she submitted testimony also saying she wants to use the authority of 16A, like the DAs, and get this going. So we all, I think, know the answers. We just need to do it. And so I really appreciate your playing such an active role on behalf of our city in pushing this and pushing the state to work more in coordination with the city agencies. And I think this entire panel, no matter where we come from in the state, pretty much agree that these are exactly the things we ought to be doing. So thank you for taking time out, and I'm glad you didn't have to come up here today.
Thank you.
Well, you know, you could do it virtually. That's what I meant.
We're glad to have you, council member. Thank you so much for your testimony today, and we'll record it in the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now move on to our next panel, and we invite the Sheriff of New York City, Sheriff Miranda, and Tashita Dawson, founder and director of Cannabis NYC.
Are we breaking?
We'll break after.
Yeah, you said that.
After which we will take a short break.